here live at UT Dallas, and there is a 10-minute delay on the stream for fair play reasons, so apologies if we don't respond to the chat right away. But we have a game started here between Gleb, Duden, and Harsha. Would you like to take us through, Brian, the start of this game?
Sure, Joe. First of all, thanks for everyone who is watching the stream. Let's go back to the beginning of the game so we can talk a little bit about the opening. So this is Harsha Baratakoti, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, the white pieces against Gleb Duden. So the game started with D4. If I don't remember, if I'm not mistaken, I think Harsha plays almost any move. So I think he just probably just picked whatever he felt more confident against Duden. He played D4, knife 6, C4, E6, and knife 3. Probably Harsha didn't want to go into the Nimso Indian with knight C3. That's why he went for knife 3. Duden plays D5. And now here Harsha has a couple of options, right? He can either play knight C3, go for the Catalan with G3, or any other sort of, let's say, slow, calm moves like E3 or B3. That wouldn't be that mainstream, but every now and then they're tried by the players, right? He went for knight C3, didn't go for the Catalan. And Duden played this move knight bd7. Joe, have you seen this move knight bd7 before?
I think I have, because the knight doesn't want to block the c pawn. Is that right?
Yeah. Also, it's in some way not defining the bishop on f8 yet. Sometimes he might go to b4. Sometimes he might just stay on e7. Also now, black might be actually threatening to take the pawn on c4, because now there's some ideas with knight b6 afterwards, and in that way, black might be playing concretely. Joe, do you know how do I get rid of that? I'm a noob. How do I do this? Oh my God, there you go. I'm learning. There you go. So knight b7. Harsha, I don't know if he was expecting this. Maybe not. He went for c takes d5. He takes d5. And bishop f4. You always want to develop your pieces, right, to the most active squares. In this case, bishop out of the pawn chain, followed by e3. Will give white a pretty, let's say, harmonious arrangement of pieces. Duden continue with c6. White plays h3, sometimes to give the bishop a square on h2, where to stay away from the knight. For example, let's say he would have played e3, then maybe knight 5 would have been annoying, as now the bishop doesn't have the square on h2. Bishop g5 might still be possible, but probably Harsha didn't want to go for any sort of complications and just play h3 right away to avoid any kind of other lines. Then Duden play knight b6, maybe. Now he wants to play bishop d7, bishop d6 in order to trade this annoying bishop on f4. And this is the current position of the game. I would say nothing so spectacular has happened so far. Just players developing pieces, and probably the action will come later. This is how it usually goes for the first 10-15 minutes. Players just try to surprise their opponent a little bit in the opening. If they manage to do it, they might get some side edge. Mess up in the knot, they will just get a comfortable position, and then they will just try to develop their pieces and try to outplay their opponents. In this sort of level, this competition, where the strength between the players is so little, it's the little differences that make in the end a huge impact when it comes to, let's say, picking the most comfortable opening or most comfortable position that you might get out of the first moves, basically. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Brian. And I wanted to welcome in. We have a live audience. This is
Huge.
my first time commentating in front of a live crowd. We are live online on Twitch and YouTube. So we'll be waiting for our online viewers to start commenting. The broadcast is actually on a delay for 10 minutes because of fair play reasons. Some of you might have heard there's been some cheating allegations in chess before. So if the broadcast is live, then players may be tuning in, but most of them are probably not allowed their phones anyways. But thank you all for joining us. Just to give a little bit of context on the format of the match, it's a team format. Each school has 4 players, and they're each playing a classical rated game. So the game is a 90-minute with 30-second increment time control. So these games will last a few hours, and they will play a second round later today and a final third round tomorrow. So this is, again, the President's Cup. This is the U.S. College Chess Championship, and these 4 teams are determined by a tournament that was held in January earlier this year, I believe at Charlotte, and the top 4 teams from the U.S. qualified for this. So those teams are UT Dallas, of course, where we're hosted, UT Rio Grande Valley, and 2 schools from St. Louis University and Webster University. So Brian is a student at UT Dallas here and a player. And so we're going to be watching some of his teammates later. But right now, we have Gleb Duden versus Harsha Baradakoti. Gleb Duden, I believe, is from UT Rio Grande, and Harsha, I think, is from Webster. So Webster actually has the highest rated team based off the average of their top 4 players. So they are actually the top seed, and UT Rio Grande is the 4th seed. So that's why they're playing right now in the first round. These are the 2 top boards, I believe.
I would think so. Their rates are pretty high. Yeah.
So I know Gleb Duden, I think, was the top board in the Collegiate Chess League, which is an online university chess championship, which actually concluded last weekend for the top division, which included UT Rio Grande and St. Louis University. It's interesting to note that Harsha has the white pieces because we actually did a drawing of colors yesterday during our opening ceremony, and the Webster coach had to pick at random. There was a whole display of kind of a magic's cape covering a white and black piece, and he had to just choose left or right, and he ended up drawing white for first round. So that's why his player, Harsha, is starting with the white pieces here. And each team will have 2 players with white and 2 players with black. The top 2 boards for Webster will have white, and the bottom, or is it alternating?
It's alternating. So,
Okay.
so usually if the first board of the team plays white, then the second board plays black, and so on and so forth. So in that way, there's some kind of equal chances for both teams. That's the whole point of giving one player white and the next one black.
And usually white has a slight edge, which is why it's sort of a big deal to these chess players who are so strong. Any slight advantage could make a difference. And Brian was going over some of these subtle opening nuances. If you get to start the game with white, then you can kind of choose what openings you want to go for. But obviously, it all depends on how black responds. So, do you have any updates on the moves here, Brian?
Yeah. So let's go back a couple of moves. We were looking at this position after white played e3. Black just continued development with bishop f5, very normal move. And now white plays g4. G4, usually, most people will tell you, as a general rule, when you're starting chess, don't move the pawns in front of your king, or in this case, your king side, right? Well, let's say you can break the rules once you master them, and in this case, these 2 players have definitely mastered the basic rules, so they go for really risky approaches in order to get an edge. As in this, once again, in this sort of a level, if they just play normal, typical moves, most often than not, the games will just end in a draw with no real fight, and therefore they try to come up with some interesting, sharp ideas as preparation before the game in order to create problems for their opponent. Because in the end, if you think about it, even though the engines say some positions are equal or sort of going to a draw, two humans are playing, and therefore the human factor comes into play by basically your opponent will make a mistake every time they face themselves in a really awkward situation, and that's what White is trying to do. He's trying to pose problems to Black basically with this move G4. Now Black decides to go for Bishop E4, pinning this knight because of the rook on H1, and White plays A3. I honestly don't know if he's still in preparation. He might be. I will assume based on the time on the clocks that White's still in preparation. Black might be figuring things out on the board, and this is basically what the White was trying to get is basically getting Black to think, right? Because that's how he might end up making a mistake. And so now he's doing his turn, let's say, to sort of figure out what is Harsha's preparation and try to not end up in a worse position out of the opening. That's his main goal here with the Black pieces. If you're playing with the Black pieces in any team competition, your goal is usually to neutralize the player with the White pieces and sort of leave your teammate with the White pieces kind of push through the match. And so doing it here, trying to control the beast of Harsha Razakoti, and Harsha will try to push as much as possible to get his team the victory, right? What do you think, Joe?
I definitely agree with you. And as a player yourself, I actually want to ask, have you played either? I'm sure you've played both of these players, right?
I actually have.
Okay.
And let's say with Duding, so I actually met him when he was pretty young. I think he was 15. And we were playing in Hungary in a close tournament in Budapest. And I beat him that time, but then I ended up meeting him once again here in a collegiate chess, and then this time he beat me actually. So yeah, it's a game where if you keep constantly working, you will end up surpassing the people that you lost to in the beginning, right? So in this case, yeah, Duding has increased his rating a lot, and then Harsha I actually played against him in the last Final Four. And I was having the Black pieces, I think. Yeah, and I lost that game actually. I made a silly mistake at some point, but yeah, I mean both of them are pretty tough opponents. I'll say around the same strength, and I think it's gonna be an interesting game. Definitely here Harsha is sort of giving us the message that he's coming here to play for the win with White pieces. Like he knows what his role is in the team. You know how in soccer, like there's a striker, a goalkeeper, right? I'm not a sport expert, but whatever. But like basically the striker needs to score, and this is what Harsha's goal is to score this point for his team. And so yeah, I think probably Duding will spend some time here deciding what to do. He might be considering moves like Bishop D6, maybe just to continue development and trade a couple of pieces. Maybe just Bishop E7, followed by short castle. You always want to get your king to a safe square as soon as possible. And also just probably spending some time trying to get some, I don't know if composure, right? Because I would think he's been surprised. And I think an important thing in chess is to never let your emotions get carried away. So whenever you feel surprised by your opponent in the opening, or he's played a move that you didn't expect basically, I think the best thing to do is just take some air, take a little break, and try to reassess what is going on in the position. And I think that's what Glenn is trying to do right now. I think maybe we can go to another game, Joe. What do you think?
Yeah, I noticed we have actually a live camera feed from the playing hall, and looks like Robbie Kavlashvili is playing there. Do you see Robbie's game?
Let me see.
So Robbie is actually from the St. Louis University team, and he's actually the captain.
I don't think it's showing
Yeah,
properly.
they're working on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I see. We have our IT team working on the details in the streaming.
Wow. So Robbie's got his
Let's
knight
go.
all the way to the back rank already. Probably captured a bishop there, and both sides have well, take us to the start of this. This is a crazy game. He's playing against Ivan from UT Dallas.
Right. So yeah. So this is basically Robbie a pretty strong GM from the Netherlands who plays for SLU, right? If I'm not mistaken, against
Yes.
our home team player Ivan Skitsko with the black pieces. So once again here, Ivan sort of have the role of neutralizing Robbie with the black pieces. So let's take a look at the game. Let's see. Game. Oops, there you go. So Robbie starts with e4. He always usually plays e4, normal move, and Ivan plays e5. I think this is his most utilized weapon, and especially against a player as Robbie who tries to always take the initiative. I think e5 is a good choice as it tends to get to a more quiet, calm game. Knight f3, right? Attacking the pawn. Ivan defense, knight c6, and bishop b5. And this is what it's called. Does anyone know what is this called? You know? Ruy Lopez, very good. This is called the Ruy Lopez, also known as the Spanish. And now Ivan has two choices, basically. I mean, not two, but like let's say the main two are either a6 or going for the Berlin defense with knight f6. Ivan chooses knight f6. I think this is what he's more used to. Castle. Everything pretty normal so far. Knight takes e4, following the Berlin defense. Rook e1 and knight a6, right? White regains the pawn e5 and bishop e7. So far, everything pretty standard. I will say this is what usually happens in most of these games in the Berlin defense. Basically, White just tries to get the game, basically some way trying to point out the fact that this knight on d6 is a little bit clumsy, but as soon as Black gets to reorganize his pieces, he should be fine, and White is going to try to pose as many problems as possible until that happens. So now White plays bishop f1. Notice the bishop was hanging on b5. Of course, Black couldn't have taken on b5 because of what? Does anyone know why knight takes b5 is a bad move?
Who here plays chess? All right. Nice. This is the chess expert in the group? Okay. Can you find a tactic in this position for White to play?
You'll get a prize. Come on, you can do it.
Yes.
Yes. Correct. You will get a prize later. Don't worry. So here, the right move, as the Pollock suggested, is knight takes c6, which is a discovered check, and then also he wins the queen. It wouldn't be mate, but it will give White quite a significant advantage after knight takes queen, because as we know, the queen is more valuable than the knight, right? And therefore, that's why I hope nobody ever play this move, knight takes b5, just bishop e7, covering the king. Bishop f1. Why bishop f1? You might ask, because any other square will be in the way of White's development. Let's say, for example, if he were to play something like bishop d3, which sometimes is played, but it's not the most accurate, then it will stop White from developing his pieces later on. Let's say the bishop cannot go to f4 because the pawn on d2 cannot be moved. A square like bishop a4 also wouldn't make that much sense. Usually in the Spanish, you keep it on this diagonal when there's some kind of pressure along this pin. But then since Black is ready to castle, and this knight will betray, the bishop on a4 will just be clumsy, and therefore the best square for the bishop is just to not get on the way of its pieces, stay close to the king, kind of also completing the protection of the king side, and then just developing his pieces with d4, knight c3, bishop f4, etc. And Black, on the meantime, needs to figure out what to do with this knight, as it has the same issue, like it's not allowing the bishop on c8 to develop, and therefore he will need to reorganize before proceeding how to develop with the bishop on c8. So bishop f1, Black took on e5, rook takes on e5, and castle. Everything pretty standard so far. White develops with d4, bishop f6, and rook e1, right? This position, if I'm not mistaken, happened a couple of times in the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Kariaki. Does anyone here know who Magnus Carlsen is? You know, right? I know you know. Yeah, there you go. He knows. And in those
Well,
matches, yeah.
tell us who is Magnus Carlsen, for those that might not know.
Who is Magnus Carlsen?
Magnus Carlsen is a former world champion, one of the most dominant chess players of all time. Some would argue the GOAT, greatest of all time. Although he didn't defend his title willingly 2 championship matches ago, but he is still the world ranked #1, I believe, and widely believed still to be the best player currently.
And probably will be for the next another 4 years, I would think. I mean, the guy is too competitive. I feel like in order to be the #1 in any discipline, you gotta hate losing as much as he does. And from what I know, he doesn't only care about chess, but also like let's say he plays volleyball, and he is like slaps the ball to the floor as hard as he can. You know, like he just loves to compete, and that's why he became the world champion. And I was saying basically like in his games, Kariaki, no, it was Carson. Yeah, he was trying moves like sort of rookie two, and this move kind of breaks the rules that I was telling you about the harmony of the pieces. You know, usually you want your bishop to be open to enter the game at any point. But once again, once you master the rules, you can break them. But until you get to that point, just follow the rules. And in this case, rook e1, pretty good move. Just getting the rook back to its initial square. I mean, after the castle, and then later on, maybe the bishop can get to d3 after let's say c3, developing this knight maybe all the way to f3, developing the bishop to f4, and just get a game. Basically, here White didn't get that much in the open. Is just trying to get a game basically. What do you think, Joe? Do you ever play this kind of line?
So I don't actually like the Roy Lopez, and it's not because of the Berlin defense. I think there's too much theory, honestly. But I play the Italian, which is one move different from the Roy Lopez. I don't bring the bishop out to attack the knight. I bring the bishop to c4, attacking the infamous weakness on f7. But obviously these players know the Roy Lopez in and out. It's one of the most famous openings of all time. And I'm really curious where these players took it, because the live position we saw I thought was kind of unique.
Let's see. Rook e1, rook e8, bishop f4, rook takes, queen takes, and knight e8. Most often than not, taking this pawn will be a little bit greedy, as black hasn't completed his development of the remaining pieces, while white is just one move away from finishing his development. So that's why black doesn't take the pawn, as he will be delaying his development, and therefore he plays knight e8, also to avoid any kind of bishop takes d6, as for example, let's say a position like this, right? An example. Something like this, bishop takes, pawn takes.
Well, could they take on b2 intermezzo?
Probably they could. I wouldn't think it's a good move. Let's think. Maybe something like bishop e5. Let me see. There's a couple of moves here. Oh, I have bishop c7. Yeah, this is pretty strong.
Okay, because you're threatening back rank if
Correct.
the queen takes. So
if he takes, then queen e8 checkmate.
Beautiful. And
then if he doesn't take, he only moves queen f8. Then if I don't have anything better, I can just play knight d2, and then I'll be with 2 pieces for the rook.
Okay.
And not only that, but also like I have completed my development, and therefore white will have a huge advantage here. Yeah, in these sort of positions, I'm pretty sure they're both still in theory. What they're trying to achieve is just get a normal development and then equalize. I mean as black, and white's trying to pose problems, so he plays knight e8, avoiding this trade on d6. Black continues with knight c3, bishop takes, and knight d5. Yeah, I mean, white has given up a pawn, and therefore whenever you are down in material, you need to kind of justify why you're giving up that pawn, right? In this case, white is already threatening the same idea in a different fashion. Let's say something like knight c7 will be a threat with idea of if knight takes, bishop takes, and then once again the 8th rank issue. That's why black plays c6, knight e7, check, king f8. Of course, you want the king coming close to the 8 to protect the knight, just in case. Knight takes, and queen f6.
Wow.
So
Leaving the knight hanging, not recapturing immediately, but rather bringing the queen out, attacking the bishop with a tempo, also attacking b2 for a second time, but probably not what Ivan's focusing on.
yeah, honestly, I never seen this position before. I will think definitely it has to be all preparation from black. Uh, if anyone wonders why not taking the knight, it's a good question. Let's say he were to take the knight with the rook, right?
Now white has a tactic with the fork.
It seems like it doesn't win a piece. Does anyone see any moves here for white? Can anyone suggest any moves for white? I know you know some moves. You tell me.
We've got some resident chess club members in attendance here.
Correct. I think queen before here was the main issue. That's why he didn't take back on c8 right away. And the only way to it's a check. Therefore, the only way to protect the bishop will be to play something like c5. But then after something like queen b7, white has a huge advantage because first of all he has the pair of bishops. Let me use my streaming skills. There you go. My pair of bishops. Then also he has a better arrangement of pieces. Like let's say harmony-wise, he only has two isle of pawns, compared to black having his whole pawn structure destroyed. Right? Let's see like this. Then the black king, since it's on f8, it tends to be exposed to some sort of tactics. And then also black is ready to, white is ready to complete his development with let's say something like rook d1 or rook e1, while black struggles to develop because of the rook on c8 will always be attacked. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Have safe travels and welcome to UT Dallas.
That's why black didn't take on c8. He went queen f6, sort of counter-attacking, right? Now he's attacking the bishop on f4. And Robbie plays rook d1.
Yeah, that queen cannot actually take the bishop, even though it looks like it's threatening the bishop, but there's a really devastating another queen check that Robbie has in his back pocket here. Brian, if you want to show us what happens if the black queen takes that free bishop.
Let me ask our great audience.
Our audience. Yeah, this is like a classic Eric Rosen, oh no, my bishop, from Robbie. Also, Eric, another St. Louisan. So does anyone know what white could play here? We were talking about developing the queen with check. We had pointed out queen to b4 previously, but there might be something even stronger.
Queen
there it is.
This guy's on fire today.
Queen e7. This is practicing your puzzle rush here.
Mm-hmm. King g8 and queen e8, checkmate.
So,
therefore, black cannot take the bishop. I'm pretty sure Ivan's still in preparation. And he took the knight, right? So temporarily, white has a pawn. Well, white is a pawn down. In return, he has the pair of bishops, as I was pointing out, and also a little bit more of coordination within his pieces. As let's say, his rook is more active than the rook on c8, and then also the king on f8 gives. Let me correct. There you go. The king on f8 also gives black a lot of trouble, always trying to keep an eye on all the possible checks that the white could have. And for example, Robbie plays queen e4, uh, double attacking the pawn h7 and also the bishop on d4. I'm pretty sure this is still in his preparation, I would think. Ivan takes on f2, king f2, and g5. Basically, black gave a piece, but now he's getting it back. And honestly, black looks pretty comfortable. I don't know what is the white's idea here, because after let's say if I were to make any other move, let's say something like
Can I be
g3.
greedy and take on h7?
If you take on h7, you probably have a lot of trouble after.
I get check, I run away.
Yeah, I would think so. Something like this, king g1, and maybe just d5.
And maybe I play rook e1.
Now you want to checkmate me, huh?
I do. I want to checkmate you.
I do. You do. You do. I can tell. So then maybe I will need to either defend with queen f6 or with knight f6. I will think knight f6. I think that looks pretty healthy. Yeah.
Queen. No.
No, not there. Where do you want to
Queen
go?
h6.
Queen h6, king g8.
Now we develop our bishop, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Maybe this position it's more annoying than I thought. Yeah, might be close to losing actually. Mhm. Mhm.
I got some fun ideas.
Maybe I underestimated the attack. You're right. I think though he took on d7 if I'm not mistaken. With the rook, basically the sort of the same idea, and then threatening
Yes.
to take on h7 eventually. So rook d7.
Well, now would black trade queens here, or is that a bad endgame?
Let's see. If queen takes f4, pawn takes, probably rook takes b7, and let's count the pawns. Usually whenever you're calculating a variation in your head, in this case we're showing on the board, but let's say you would like to do this in your head, you want to take a look at what's the resulting position of your calculation, right? In this case, white has 5 pawns against 5 pawns of black. The main difference is that white's pawns are easier to defend. Like, I mean, there's pretty hard for black to attack them, while the rook on b7 is a beast that is gonna most likely capture most of black's pawn. And not only that, it's also like in this sort of open positions, the bishop tends to be better than the knight, and therefore here white, if not winning, might have like a huge advantage. But this didn't happen in the game because Ivan assessed that this is not the right position to go for. And I think right now he's taking his time. I will assume, I don't know if he's still in preparation as he's taking his time. Oh, also there's a delay, right? Yeah, there's a delay. That may be why he's spending some time here.
No. This is live.
Oh, this is live?
This is live. The broadcast is delayed.
You're right.
But
we have premium broadcast.
I think so. That variation of the queen trade, obviously recapturing the piece right away, sounds like a good idea. But black cannot afford to go into that endgame because of the terrible pawn structure that would result. Even though the material would be technically even, I think Robbie would have a very easy time mopping up the rest of the pawns there.
Correct.
You'll also notice white only has 2 pawn chains, 3 on the queen side and 2 pawns on the king side. But black would have double isolated pawns. They would have, every single pawn would be stranded on an island of its own, making them very difficult to defend in this variation. So Ivan's not going to trade queens with a queen capture, but might consider taking the bishop another way with the pawn, because white's threatening to maybe get out of the pin.
So you're saying something like pawn takes, right?
Yeah, but this allows that idea that we had earlier of queen takes pawn, right?
Yes. Queen takes pawn could be a move here. Then important to note is that even though the king on EFA looks exposed, at the same time the queen on f6 is sort of
Defending all the checks.
Yeah, like a total defender, like defending all the checks here,
And defending
f7,
f7,
right?
of course.
Probably here the white's next move will be something like bishop c4, and therefore, whenever you are in a position where your opponent is constantly putting pressure on you, the best idea is to trade pieces. In this case, the rook on c7 is quite annoying, and therefore I will think something like rook c7 could try to alleviate the pressure, the tension for black, and that way protecting the pawn b7, kicking away the rook from c7, and then if he trades, of course black is completely fine here, probably even better, but I mean why wouldn't take? And so yeah, maybe that's the move, g takes f4, because the endgame is definitely not an option here. As you were pointing out, why would just start taking all of black's pawns in this position?
All right. Well, while we wait for Ivan to decide on their next move, maybe there's another game that we can take a look at.
Let's go. Event. Let's see. Let's see.
Maybe.
Which game do we want to look at?
Would you rather look at a teammate's game?
You. Which game do you want to look at? Our audience is asking for Andrei Makovey against Dan Basurin.
So going for a teammate here.
So Andre is also a hometown player of UTD. I think he's board 2. He has the white pieces. So once again, as I was explaining, usually the black player, the player with the black pieces try to neutralize, and the one with the white pieces tries to push. In this case, Andre is gonna try to go to put as much pressure as possible. So he plays e4. He usually always plays e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then here Andre can either play the Rui Lopez that happened in Ivan's game, or the Italian that Joe likes to play. In this case, he follows Joe's advice. He went for the Italian, bishop c4, knight f6, and d3. This is what is called the Gyoko piano, right? I don't know Italian, but I think it means slow development. And in this case, White just tries to sort of develop his pieces slowly. Let's say with something like castle, c3, bring the rook to e1, and then eventually try to play d4. And as we know, in chess, controlling the center is pretty important. And that's what sort of the Gyoko piano tries to achieve by just slowly maneuvering and pushing towards the center. So d3, bishop c5, castle, d6, c3, a5, sometimes a useful move. There's always a dilemma between playing a6 or a5. What do you think, Joe? Which one do you usually prefer, a6 or a5?
Well, a5 is trying to take more space. It also helps control b4. They obviously both have pros and cons. A6 maybe helps prepare for b5 to hit the bishop, but maybe isn't such a problem for white in the long run. So I like a5, and it definitely takes control over the b4 square from white pushing maybe b4.
Correct. Yeah, so basically each one has their pros and cons. I don't know exactly if one here is more accurate than the other, but in general, a5, yeah, as you mentioned, tries to control the push of b4. On the other hand, it gives away the b5 square. Remember, every time you move a pawn, you need to remember what are you giving up in return. In this case, by putting the pawn on a5 and now on a6, like this, then the b5 square now in this scenario becomes a useful square for what the white pieces. Maybe the bishop can go to b5 in certain positions, or the knight eventually might get to b5 after something like a4, knight a3, knight b5 sometimes. And so each one has their pros and cons. In this case, Dan Basurin chooses a5. White just continues with the slow maneuvering with rook e1, bishop a7. A7 is usually a good square for the bishop. Usually your bishops, since they can attack from pretty far away, you would like to keep them as far away from the action as possible, so they don't get in the middle of any kind of confrontation in the center. Therefore, bishop a7 steps away from any possible d4. White continues with knight bd2, typical maneuver. Can anyone tell me where's the knight on d2? trying to go to usually? You know it? Where the knight tries to go usually? Correct, correct. So usually you want to develop the knight here, then maybe to g3. Especially let's say this is not gonna happen, but let's say black were to play something like bishop g4, then after moves like h3, bishop h5, and then knight f1. The knight gets to g3, attacks the bishop, pushes away from the pin, and white can continue with his development. That's where the knight tries to go. And I want to point out this is usually you want to have like a plan in your head how you want to arrange your pieces, and therefore white is consistent with his setup and tries to get his knight to f1 to eventually push d4, maybe with another g3 support e4. As you can see, what white is trying to do is some sort of cooperate with all his pieces to get towards the goal of fighting for the center. And that's what you should always try to achieve in your chess games, basically. So I continue with castle, h3, avoiding any sort of bishop g4, just a normal useful move. Knight e7. Black also trying to get his knight to g6. Also, sometimes trying to fight for the center with c6 and d5. That's also a possibility. Even sometimes after something like c6, d5, the bishop sometimes even comes back toward through b8 in some positions. So knight e7, useful move. Bishop b3. What's the idea of bishop b3? Well, sometimes black might try to trade this bishop, and then if you don't wanna if you wanna avoid the trade of pieces so soon, as most often than not, this will lead to a really equal game. White can go to c2. Also, by getting the bishop to b3, sometimes the knight can jump to c4 in certain positions. That's what's going on here. As you can see, some sort of a slow maneuvering game. Continue with knight g6, d4 finally, rook e8, everything pretty normal, pretty standard, and bishop c2. So I was telling you now the bishop goes to the t2 square from where it protects the e4 pawn. In this way, it frees the knight to move to f1, because, for example, if you would have done this right away, what is the issue here? Can anyone tell me what is the issue with knight f1 directly? You know it. I know you know it. Don't run. Don't run. What is the issue with moving the knight right away to f1 without putting the bishop on c2 first?
That's right. So that knight was doing a very important job protecting the e4 pawn, which looks like it was already protected by the rook, but after this pawn trade in the center, black's rook also gets to open up, activate, and now black has two attackers. So bishop to c2 is very important to play first, making sure that we overprotect our e-pawn before the knight can maneuver back to the king side.
That's why bishop c2 was played first. Bishop d7. Honestly, this is quite a rare move, in the sense of the bishop rarely goes to d7. In this case, he might have a concrete idea. I don't know if he's trying to go to c6 maybe, and sort of force black to play d5. Let's say, for example, something like knight f1, bishop c6, now threatening the pawn on e4, and if d5 now, even though black sort of lost a tempo, in reality it's not a big deal, as this tempo doesn't really matter in this position, and also the bishop on a7 gets free now. Now it becomes a monster, right? That's why maybe he played bishop d7. I'm not quite sure, but why continue with knight f1? Oh yeah, he did play. Oh no.
Let's hear it now. Yeah.
Oh no. Oh yeah, I got excited. I was like, oh my god, I can read their minds, but apparently no. So
maybe they can hear us.
Yeah, maybe this hasn't happened yet, but it's blacks to move. Dan Basuri is taking his time, which is a little bit surprising, honestly, in the sense of he played bishop d7. I'm pretty sure he had an idea already, and the most normal move to expect will be knight f1, and therefore I will think he already has his move in his head. Maybe he's just double checking his idea. I we will see what Dambasurin might do. In the meantime, let's go to another game. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, we'll give them some time to think this out. That is definitely probably the position I'm most familiar with,
Mhm.
just having played the Italian the most. But so far, we've looked at a couple UT Dallas players. Also, Dan Basurin is a teammate of Robbie from St. Louis University. Maybe we go back to Webster versus UT Rio Grande.
Let's see some interesting positions. Let's see. Aha, this is quite unique. So this is, if I'm not mistaken, board four.
I assume this is also board for Jacob Fuss, who actually played in the Collegiate Chess League last weekend, is a board for International Master, which is an amazing title, but for this event is actually he's one of the few, as most of these teams have all GM lineups. I believe Texas Rio Grande only has 3 grandmasters here
Mm-hmm.
competing. So Jacob Fuss is their board four up against Emilio Cordova, who presumably is the board four from Webster.
Do you know him? I think I know him. Yeah. I mean, he's actually from Peru, so I definitely know him. He's my countrymate, and yeah, I definitely here Emilio, even though he has the black pieces, gonna try to play for the win as he's a more experienced player than Jacob Fuss, and he always sort of tried to go for offbeat openings, like really complicated, sharp lines in order to put his opponent in pressure. So let's see what he played here. Fuss starts with c4. Emilio plays e6, knight c3, and Emilio plays right away b6. Pretty interesting setup. If I'm not mistaken, I think most often than not he likes these kind of setups. Uh, One reason because they're pretty easy to play. Like your pieces are gonna go definitely to bishop b7, sometimes f5, knight f6. The bishop can go to b4. And another reason is because players don't really prepare against this. So the surprise factor here is key in this kind of events where there's only 3 rounds and each point matters. And therefore Emilio tries to surprise his opponent already in move 2. I would think Faz was prepared for this still. So d4, we're transposing to some sort of uh, Queen's Indian, yeah, Queen's Indian with the bishop on b7. Maybe some sort of, maybe also some sort of Nimso Indian if they eventually play bishop b4. So why black play bishop b4 in this position? White continues with e3, bishop b7, right? Knight e2, and f5. So now what Emilio is basically is saying by playing f5 is he's telling you, hey, I want to develop my knight, but first I want to put my pawn in front of my knight. Usually that's what you want to achieve. Most often than not, it's not feasible because of concrete reasons, like the position doesn't allow you to have time for that. But in this case, since there's no real way to take advantage of the exposed king, and also like the bishop helps to control this diagonal plus the pawn f5, then the move on pawn f5 is a pretty interesting idea, right? It's a pretty setup to develop,
Brian,
continue with knight
I have a
f6.
question.
Yeah,
Why knight to e2 instead of knight to c3, which feels a little bit more natural to me?
that's a good question. I'm glad you asked. So basically, most often than not, you would like to kick out this bishop from b4. But then if you were to kick it out right away, he will take on c3, pawn takes, and even though these positions are quite common to have the double pawns like this, um, let's say is not ideal if you first of all didn't prepare for it, which I think might be the case, and also black has a pretty setup to continue. He continues with d6, c5, eventually tries to put pressure on the pawn on c4 by playing moves like knight b7 or knight c6, knight a5, rook c8. I have too many arrows, but yeah, and therefore with a knight on e2, what White is trying to say is like I'm gonna kick you out, but first I want to make sure that after you take on c3, I can take back with the knight. So for example, the game continue f5, and now a3, and now if White were to take, Then I take back with the knight, and basically I have the pair of bishops for nothing in reality, like here. Like why is just better here. That's why, even though it looks a little bit clumsy, the whole point is to basically tell black, hey, either you're gonna take or you wasted a time by playing bishop b4. So Emilio goes back to d6. Interesting setup. As I was telling you in the previous game, usually you don't want to put your bishop in front of your own pawn, like in this case. Once again, these are experts and they can break the rules. And in this scenario, for example, it's not such a big deal to have the bishop in front of the pawn because the other bishop has already developed through the other diagonal. In the other scenario, where the bishop needs to develop through f5, then this would have been a horrible setup, right? But since the bishop already developed on b7, it's not such a big deal. So bishop d6, d5, pretty direct, right? Aggressive, trying to go for complications. Knight f6 and g3. Since the bishop wasn't able to develop through this diagonal, now he wants to develop through this diagonal, followed by short castle, right? Emilio continues his development with knight a6, right? Because the knight cannot really go to any other square than a6. Bishop g2 and knight c5, right? Everything so far quite normal. Probably white has a small edge, I would think, because of the extra space in the center. But it's a pretty messy game, and what Emilio has in his favor is that he plays these positions every weekend. So like he knows the plans pretty well for black, and I think that's his main argument for going to these positions. What do you think, Joe? Who do you prefer here, white or black?
Just, I would say white. I like white because I think they have more space in the center, right? The d5 pawn I think is kind of annoying to have to deal with, and I actually like this position with the tension between the two fianchettoed bishops. That d pawn is pinned currently for white, but after castling, you could consider trading, but I don't think that Jacob would do that.
You mean trading in which fashion?
Yeah, taking on e6.
You mean something like, let's say, castle, and then trading? Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. He wouldn't consider that as...
That would be beneficial to black.
Most often than not, yes. Something like this.
Yeah.
You fix the issue of the D delay pawn, the D7 delay pawn. Now it takes on E6. Probably black might try to continue with something like getting his queen to replace the bishop. What do I mean with this? Let's say something like putting the queen in this diagonal. It will gain tempo by giving a check, and then also you can bring the rook to the action. So yeah, I would think most often than not, black is doing fine here, unless there's some really concrete idea, right? Let's say something like b4, and suddenly the knight doesn't have a square, which might be the case. It depends. We will need to see. But yeah, usually white wants to keep the tension and just keep developing, right? So in the game, castle happened. Castle? Oh no. Oh, this is the current position. Yeah. Emilio is taking his time now.
Yeah, so I do like white. I do think that b4 will probably come at some point, and maybe white will fianchetto the second bishop as well. That would be a good diagonal for the dark square bishop, I believe.
Definitely, yeah. No, yeah, I think it's gonna be a pretty complex game. By the amount of time Emilio is spending, I would think he's already out of book, since he has almost 20 minutes less than Jacob. So I'm pretty sure right now he's just trying to figure out how to get like a complicated position. I think that was his main goal from the beginning of the game, trying to get Jacob into an uncomfortable position. But I think so far Jacob has sort of consolidated and got a comfortable position out of the opening. I will think. So yeah, we will see how this develops.
So Brian, you said that Emilio is your fellow countryman. You're both from Peru.
Correct. Yeah.
So, how long have you known Emilio, and do you have any fun facts about him?
You know what's funny? I I heard about Emilio since I was 8 years old, and but the thing is that he moved at a pretty early age to Mexico. So when I started playing and competing in Peru, he was already out of the country. So he was always like this sort of legend, you know, like mysterious character that we know is a great player from Peru, but like he's not in the country anymore. And so first time I saw him was in 2014 in a youth festival. I saw him. He was giving lessons to some kids, and then was playing against. He was like playing blitz, you know, and like he's a pretty good player. So that there was like a huge crowd around him, you know, watching him and everything. But the first time I actually got to talk to him was in 2016. I was playing a tournament in Peru. He that time he was already starting going back to Peru, and I played against him in. I was leading the tournament together with him, and I got to face him. He destroyed me, and that's how we met. And also at some point I used to I went to Webster also on my first year of college, so I also spent quite an amount of time with him. He's a great guy. Fun fact about him: it's funny, but every time you see him at any sort of chess event, I feel like he's more famous than even like Carson or Caruana. You know, like everyone is just like, oh, there's a million. They're like, go and shake his hand. You know, like it's like he's well known by the whole chess community because of his let's say eccentric personality. You know.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
what's Emilio's claim to fame?
Emilio's what?
Claim to fame.
Claim to fame.
Yeah. What makes him such an eccentric character? Someone that people will go to him just to shake his hand.
I think he just always has some topic to bring up to the table. Like suddenly, maybe the conversation ends, and he asks you, "Hey, what do you think about resurrection?" You know, and you're like, "Oh wait, what happened here?" You know, and suddenly the conversation just develops. And yeah, I think he's a pretty good talker. Yeah, he always has something new to say to the conversation. That's what makes him, let's say, loved by the community. I think his charisma. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe if he finishes his game and is in a good mood, we can bring him on to interview and see his personality firsthand.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Hopefully, yeah, we will see. But in this game, let's say, oh, Black already played five, stopping B4.
Yes. Well,
Not really stopping it, but at least
he's got a
not
yeah,
making it
not
that
immediately.
right, not making it that easy, right? Because B4 right now is not possible due to the rook on A1 hanging,
Yes.
and therefore Jacob now has the question, right? Usually there's this question: should I play B3 and stop A4 as now B4 will be a move, or should I just allow A4? So for example, if let's say I move like rook B1, then
A4.
A4, which stops basically B4 because of the en passant. You know, every time I play against kids and I do en passant, they're like, "What is this? This is not legal." And I'm like, it is. I'm not lying to you. And they're like, "No, let me look up the rules." You know. And then they believe me, but most often than not, kids don't really believe in en passant. So you gotta teach them. And then basically, yeah, the issue with this is that B4 is never possible. There's not really any direct way to attack A4, and so this is the dilemma that White has to either allow it or prevent it with B3. In which case, still A4 might be possible, but at least I get to play something like B4, and my structure is more what's the word? Harmonious, yeah, consolidated.
Yeah, I definitely like that structure. I think B3 is a good move, and I think after B3 you could still try to get your bishop fianchettoed. Another idea that I have, you mentioned Black putting the bishop on D6 is maybe a little weird, and I'm wondering if White can maybe take advantage of that at some point with Knight B5.
Knight B5, right? So first of all, let's assess how bad is it if he takes the bishop. Let's say if it were to be Black, I would think it would be quite advantage for White, and therefore, because if let's say for example something like castle can probably take, I would think Pawn takes. And let's see his position. How are we doing? So we have the pair of bishops at the same time. I'm not able to develop my bishop on c1 right away since I cannot play uh, b3. Sorry, b4. Maybe I need to play b3, and then maybe bishop b2.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of thinking how bad is it for black? Because I mean, ideally, yeah. If I take on e6, then this is great for let's say something like this will be completely fine for black. Like no issues. The pair of bishops is it's gone, and now also the queen can just go to let's say c6, replace the bishop, and black's completely fine. But let's say I never take on d6, right? How bad is this pawn structure with these pawns on d7 and d7? Uh, because they're on black's pieces way to complete his development, right? Like the rook can never go to d8, then the queen goes to c7. It's kind of far away from the action, let's say, since these pawns block its own queen. And then if I play e5, I have the same issue basically here.
Yeah.
And also the bishop on b7 becomes dead. So based on this, he gonna hit these pawns, right?
So black probably would not allow that capture of their bishop. They would probably move their bishop either back, or you could actually consider going forward to e5.
Right. Bishop e5, then the only thing to consider will be something like f4, right? And suddenly the bishop is running out of squares here.
Yeah, so that probably wouldn't work. F5 is committal, but I think worth it.
You can make an argument saying that now the e4 square has been weakened, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes losing a tempi is not so critical if there's no way to take advantage of it. But yeah, I would think he will play something like bishop e7 most likely, as you were pointing out, and then followed by castle. And it's a complicated game. I don't know what's the evaluation, honestly. I prefer not to know. I think this sort of games usually they're defined by who is able to keep the tension most of the game, who is able to not let's say relax, you know. And I think that's what we're gonna see in this game, a total fight until the end. So right now it's white to move, probably deciding between the moves as you mentioned, knight b5 or b3, and I think we'll probably see one of them on the board in a moment. So let's go to another game in the meantime. Let's see.
Did you want to stay in this match, or did you want to switch?
I wanna go to a game where action is going on.
You want to see the action?
I wanna see the.
Yeah, we're
the
still
fight.
somewhat early on for classical, but obviously we're getting in.
Let's ask our audience. Which games do you guys wanna look at? Huh?
Does anyone here have any players that they're fans of?
Ben, which game do you wanna look at? Let's look at Ivan's game.
All right, yeah, back to Robbie.
Uh-huh.
That's Slew versus Ivan. So our crowd might have a little bias towards UT Dallas, but that's okay.
That's normal.
Go Comets, right?
Hmm. If you're not biased, then
I've been told the commentators are not supposed to be biased, but I do think that a little bit of bias is okay. Obviously, Brian from UT Dallas, and a fun fact that I shared yesterday is my dad actually went to SLU.
no way.
So
you're biased too.
yeah, inherently, but
Inherently, but yeah. We were looking at this position, and here we were discussing that maybe this endgame will be quite annoying for black, but apparently this is what happened in the game.
really,
So, yeah. So I think this is the current position, right? Or is that my
no, I think
analysis?
that's our analysis.
Oh my God, no, you're right.
I was gonna say there's no way.
You're right. So this is what happened in the game. Rook c7.
That was what you suggested. I thought this is a much better move.
Yeah, I suggested in a different position, but the idea is the same. Basically, you want to get rid of this annoying rook on d7. So rook c7, kind of getting that job done. Rook takes, knight takes, and queen e5, right? Now, forcing black to take on f4, there's no other move. Like this would just be a piece down, right?
Yes.
So queen takes, pawn takes, and bishop d3. Let's take a look at this game, this endgame. So white, it's currently a pawn down, which most likely I will think he recovers, or maybe not. I don't know anymore, honestly.
I think he
Uh,
gets the pawn. That F pawn looks pretty hard to defend.
right. At the same time, though, let's say after I play, let's see what happens in the game. King
King
g7,
up, king
king
up,
f3,
knight.
and now, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like knight, either d5 or e6, and I wasn't sure how easy it is for white to recover the pawn.
White would have to try to attack the knight
Correct,
and take it.
like something like this maybe, because if I, for example, this is what I was thinking. Like if I try to attack the knight this way, then
You get forked.
right, and black's a pawn up,
Yes.
right? So probably I need to attack it this way, and in this way, everything's protected.
Exactly.
Uh, I will think. I don't know if are we able to see how much time they spend on each move, Joe?
Um,
I think we are at the end of the game. I don't know if during the game.
maybe, can you click on moves? Maybe. Does it say no? I don't know.
It's okay. It's okay. But yeah. So Ivan already. Either he knew his position or he just assessed that it's not worth to defend the pawn. The end game is completely fine. So he played h6, king takes, and king f6, and yeah, here black equalized. There's really no.
You think this is gonna be a draw?
Uh, if under normal circumstances, most likely yes, unless white tries to overpush or black tries to overpush. Another result might appear, but most often than not, they should end a draw. As the thing is that black doesn't really have any clear targets. Let's say the pawn h6. That was the point of putting the pawn h6, so it's not in the same color as the bishop. Then it's not like, I mean, the bishop is slightly superior than the knight here because of the open position, but it's not such a big deal, I would say, since there are not so many targets for white. So most often than not, it should be a draw, I think. What do you think, Joe?
I do think it will be a draw because both players have still over an hour left on their clocks. So I think that both players should be able to defend sufficiently. I do agree, white slight edge because of the bishop over a knight.
Correct.
Also because the H and G pawns are connected, whereas black's pawns on the king side are separated. So in theory, that's kind of two positives for white, but I think even material and this much time on the clock, black should be able to defend. But who knows? Maybe Robbie's going to push with the white pieces, maybe bring the bishop to f5 and try to get behind the pawns, force them onto dark squares, and maybe the king can infiltrate. But I don't really see that happening. So I do think this will end in a draw, which honestly I think is a little surprising given how quickly these players got to this position with so much time left on their clock.
Right. I mean, this is what usually happens when both players are pretty well prepared, and basically white tries an idea. In this case, he tried this. What is it? This pawn sacrifice, right? Pretty standard in this Berlin defense. But the thing is that Ivan was pretty well prepared, and therefore he neutralized Robbie's ideas, and he got to a really equal endgame, pretty comfortably. So yeah, most likely will be a draw, and that's a good, let's say, start for UTD. I would think drawing the board one with the black pieces. I think that was the goal of Ivan in this game, mainly to just neutralize Robbie, and then leave his teammates try to push for the win on the other boards. So actually, like, we can take a look at the other boards of UTD.
Yeah, I think that's also a really good idea that you're bringing into this is the team strategy. You mentioned even though you're getting a draw so quickly, it's a good thing for your team because you're playing with the black pieces and you're up against your opponent's top board who's playing with the white pieces. Robbie, obviously, a very strong player, captain, board one for SLU, and is the slight rating favorite as well. So let's take a look at these lower boards from this match and see if Ivan's teammates can take advantage of his equal position and try to get an advantage on a lower board.
Correct. Let's take a look at Balaji. I think he's board 3, if I'm not mistaken. Balaji has the black pieces. Let's take a look at the opening pretty quickly. E4, Sicilian, typical of Balaji. He tries to get some complicated positions. In Queen C7, this is the Rosso Limo. Queen C7, Castle, and E5. This is quite interesting, actually. I definitely know it's his preparation. Like it has to be, because let's put it this way: these sort of moves, giving up the d5 square right away at the beginning of the game, is usually might be considered like a positional mistake for black, but definitely he is doing it for concrete reasons. So this should be his preparation. So e5, d3, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, knight c3, and castle. So this is what I was saying. White takes the knight on f6, so in that way he gets complete control over d5 square. Bishop takes, knight e5, and queen d8. And now I would think that Balaji was has this position analyzed basically, and he's just sort of saying, okay, you get a knight on d5, and then what basically? Like I'm gonna play d6, maybe bishop e6, g6, bishop g7, maybe some potential f5, and then if white doesn't really do anything concrete, then in the long run, black might have the pair of bishops and a more comfortable position. That's Balaji's idea, I would think. So white continue with queen d2, d6, h3, stopping bishop g4, right? h6, a4, just sort of gaining space in case of any sort of a6 from black. Bishop e6 and bishop c4, because we don't want to give out the d5 square so easily, right? Like we want to be able to keep this bishop, let's say on d5, control the a2 g8 diagonal, because otherwise, let's say any other move, like let's say something like king h1, then black has no issues here. Actually, black is preferable here because the bishop on c4 doesn't really have any bright future, right? Like it's gonna, if it goes to c4 now, it's blocked by its own pawn, and therefore, why will we playing with down a piece, sort of, you know?
Yeah, Brian, I wanted to ask, instead of maybe bishop c4 here, knowing that we put the knight on d5, attacking the bishop, would we ever take the bishop, even though it invites black's queen to develop and connect the rooks? We're maybe helping them, but at the same time, we're making sure that black doesn't stay with the bishop pair?
That's a good question. So most often than not, you will not want to take, because it simplifies black's life basically in the sense of after queen takes, even though some people might say, oh, but the pawn d6 is weak, maybe white can try to exploit that. In reality, this d6 is not a weakness if white can exploit it, and this is the case. Like there's no direct way to put pressure on d6, and therefore black can just continue his development pretty easily. Like I will even say, if white is not careful, black might even be better here after something like knight e7, letting this bishop on the air with no intention, bringing the rooks, and black has a pretty comfortable position. So yeah, as you were saying, taking the bishop will sort of look like simplifying, but in reality, this is what black wants, and therefore he gets a comfortable position in this moment. That's why he plays bishop c4, right?
Yep.
King h7. With the idea of playing g6, he didn't play g6 right away because the pawn on h7 would have been hanging, right? So bishop c4, king h7, a5, trying to gain more space on the queen side. g6, now Balaji has the idea of bishop g7 and potentially some f5. And then maybe the pair of bishops might start playing a big role here once I get this set up. So a6, b6, sort of awakening the light squares for black, and c3, right?
Yeah, that a6 pawn is pretty annoying. It's kind of a thorn in black's side, and that could be a long-term advantage if you could imagine trading a lot of the pieces. That a7 pawn can become a weakness, but we're very far off from that still. c3 is a very common move, fighting for the center, and
Yeah.
I'm curious to see. Uh, I guess black's next plan, they're going to bring their bishop back and go for the f pawn push, as you mentioned.
That's what happened. Bishop g7. And now White understands that if he just stays passive, let's say he passed the move, something like rook e1, a move like this, it wouldn't make that much sense since there's no action on the e file. Then after f5, black will probably be pretty comfortable. I'll even say maybe already better here because basically White didn't gain anything from the queen side.
Mm-hmm.
He is also sometimes threatening already something like pawn takes, bishop takes,
Yeah.
or rook takes. The sort of neglectment from White from his queen side and just staying passive may him get his position, and then Black will start taking the initiative here. That's why White reacts with b4. He understands that he needs to create some kind of trouble for Black, and now Balaji is thinking, probably deciding between f5 and I don't know if pawn takes. No, probably just f5. I would think that's his main candidate here, sort of going for the attack.
Yeah, just ignoring White's previous move b4, because really, what is White threatening with that? To take on c5? Um, I don't think that is actually an issue for Black. Black could recapture with two different pawns. Probably you take with
The
d pawn.
DT pawn,
Yeah,
yes, because one you want to keep the b file closed, so in that way you don't need to worry about the queen side, and also the d6 pawn was what's it called when a pawn is behind
backwards.
a backwards pawn, yeah, basically, and therefore they would just help Black, right? So maybe his idea is to play b5 and sort of try to release the tension, because for example, let's say b5. If he goes to e7, then White is able to trade some pieces, and therefore the attack on the king side might not be that terrible. And then if he goes, let's say a move, let's say king g8, then the knight on a5 would
It's
just
kind of
be
trapped.
pretty clumsy. Yeah, it wouldn't be part of the game anymore.
Yeah.
So and therefore Balaji is taking his time. He played queen d7. He first connects his rooks, and then decides if he wants to go for f5 or not. Also, now he's pointed out sometimes that some ideas with bishop takes h3 also might be quite annoying for White in certain moments, scenarios, right?
That'd be very aggressive.
Yeah. I'm curious though if this move allows something annoying as such as bishop b5, you know,
Okay.
pinning the knight. I I don't know how Balaji is planning to react to the bishop b5, for example.
Yeah, queen d7 was not one of our candidate moves. Uh, not going for it with f5 right away, and also not addressing b4 or bishop to b5 as White's move. So this is an interesting moment here. We could see White either push b5 or put the bishop on b5, this option you had just pointed out. And Balaji's going to be in an annoying pen, although maybe it can't quite be taken advantage of immediately, but maybe White can play something like d4 in the future.
Yeah, the d4, or I mean, even if he doesn't have anything concrete, it's just annoying to always worry about this knight in this way. So I'm not quite sure what's Balaji's idea after bishop b5. We will see. Also, Nicolis is taking his time between his options. I would think more often than not he'll play bishop b5, but we will see. Let's go to another game from our team. Let's look at the board 4. Aditya Samant with the white pieces against Tianqi Wang. Since Aditya is higher rated and has the white pieces, this is where usually we will try to put pressure in the match. And Aditya goes for his normal e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, the Rui Lopez. the Berlin defense, the same game as same line as Ivan's, right? Knight takes c4, but here Aditya deviates from that game, and instead of playing rook e1, which is what happens in Robbie's game, in this line, he goes for d4, the most traditional Berlin defense, right? So now knight e6, this is all theory. Black attacks the bishop on b5, white takes, pawn takes on e5, black has to move the knight, and the queen trade comes, right? Have you seen this position before, Joe?
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you prefer with black, with white?
So I prefer with white because I like having castled,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't like having to recapture my my queen with the king.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I also prefer white most often than not. I mean, I definitely like this is it's been proven that black equalizes, but I feel like most often than not is if your opponent kind of relaxes, you can put a lot of problems because I mean the main idea in this position is that if I'm able to trade all my pieces, and pieces by I meant like the knight, the bishop, and the rooks, then the endgame is winning for white, as we will have a majority here of 4 against 3, and even though black also has 4 against 3 on this side too, because he has double pawns, he's not able to create a pass pawn, and therefore white is virtually a pawn up. Therefore that's what black needs to worry about. In return, he has the pair of bishops. That's his main attribute. But he needs to worry about where to put the king also, because as you pointed out, since he cannot castle anymore, black needs to decide to either bring the king to c8 or to e8. So the game continue knight c3, king e8, and h3. Everything pretty standard so far. I'm pretty sure Aditya is still in theory. b6. I don't think I've seen this b6 before.
Yeah, I like this move, king back to e8 for black, resetting their castling privileges, right, Brian?
Yes. No, what do you mean resetting?
That's a joke.
Okay. Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
sometimes the king moves back to its original square and players forget. And then I've heard stories of players castling, and then either it's missed or it gets called out as an illegal move, and the king was touched, so they still have to move their king.
Yeah, actually, once in Peru, there were 2,300 players playing, like a game, like an actual official game, and I think one of the players, he got checked, like, he had to move the king like 3 times, and then he castled afterwards. And neither he or his opponent realized.
After 3 times?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
And so when the guy who lost, the guy who allowed the castle, the guy who didn't complain, basically, he went to chess base to enter the game. He couldn't enter the castle, and that's what he realized. He was like, "Oh my god!" But I think at that point,
it's too late.
It's too late. Yeah,
Yeah.
If it already happened, it's done. But yeah, those sort of things happen sometimes. But
well,
yeah.
so we'll keep an eye on this game.
Oh yeah.
Although luckily the DGT board wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah.
So probably these players are also too good to make that mistake.
Rook d1, bishop b4, knight e2. Ideally, you don't want to allow the black to take on a3. Let's say something like a3.
Yeah.
Because then white will be giving up all his sort of advantage in this way. Like there's no what's the word? With the opposite color bishops, it's pretty hard for white to create chances, as most opposite color bishop endgames will be a draw.
Yeah.
And therefore white needs to maintain the knight. That's why he plays knight e2, bishop b7, knight e4, takes, knight takes, and bishop c5. Right? Remember, black cannot long castle. I mean, he can try, but probably the arbiter will appear, and therefore he plays bishop c5, knight f5, trying to post province, and rook g8. Yeah, so I would think white got a pretty comfortable position here, honestly, based on how awkward black pieces are as of right now. As I was saying, usually you want to trade as many pieces as possible, so I would think the move that followed was bishop e3. Oh no, he played g4 first.
Wow.
Interesting. So I'm curious, if something like bishop e3, Maybe this wouldn't have been such a big deal for black. Maybe after rook d8 and just start
Yeah,
trading pieces, huh?
one of the problems with black's position is their Fianchetto bishop is blocked by their doubled c pawns. So I think trading that dark square bishop actually is beneficial for black in that they don't have to move that dark square bishop out of the way anymore because it's already been traded. So I think at some point black probably wants to push c5,
C5, yeah,
right?
definitely, yeah. And then after that, and trading a couple of rooks, he will have solved all his opening issues, and black will have equalized. So maybe that's why didn't play bishop e3. He goes for g4, sort of increasing his space advantage, and also asking black, what's your next move? And black goes bishop f8. I'm curious if rook d8, which will be, let's say, a move that black would normally play to trade pieces. Maybe black was annoyed by something like bishop g5.
Yeah, exactly. Bishop g5 looks really annoying, just attacking the rook, and if black trades rooks, well, guess what? White's threatening a really nasty threat.
Right.
That's going to be a checkmate there.
And f6 wouldn't really work because why black would just lose a pawn, um, and therefore that's
and
probably
still
why.
have the same sort of threat.
Yeah, yeah, and that's probably why he played bishop f8 instead. Maybe also trying to kick out the knight without allowing knight h6, because in that case I can just take the knight and the position will become more equal. So f3, interesting move, trying to just bring the king towards the center, and c5, right? King f2 protects the pawn. h6. H6 against the idea of bishop g5. That should be the point. Now black wants to play rook d8.
Exactly.
And Aditya plays h4. He says, you know what? I'm just gonna fix this pawn on h6, make you like a slave to defend these two pawns on g7 and h6, and then
what about g5 for white?
g5 for white. I would think he will reply with h5,
Okay.
followed by g6, and then I will have given up this sort of
Yeah.
tension, weakness that you have, and therefore I want to sort of fix it, and then ask you questions like, okay, I will develop my bishop, and always keep your bishop on f8, and the rook in g8 is pretty clumsy, right? And therefore y will be better here. So yeah, this is a comfortable position for Aditya. I would think he is in control right now, and could potentially convert the first point for UTD. But we will see. It's still a long game to go, right? Let's take a look at another game, Joe. What do you think?
I'm wondering, the game that we have on the camera, is this, it's another,
Which game is
it's one of your teammates
Is that Balaji?
versus Nicolosi.
Is that Balaji? It is Balaji. Let's look at Balaji.
We just looked at this one, right?
So Balaji ended up
any
playing.
updates?
Why play Queen A2? Interesting. So the
Another
idea of
curveball.
Queen A2 is, if now let's say Black plays F5, what will happen here? My audience, please tell me what happens here if Black plays F5. Knight B6, yes.
Yeah. What's wrong with knight F6? Exactly. It's a nice discovery, but the rook recaptures defending the bishop.
What is this knight F6? Yeah, it's not.
Well,
knight
I like it first because we're always looking for checks, the most
Mhm.
forceful move. But
that's true. That's true.
once we dismiss it because of rook captures, then we can find our knight takes b6 tactic, and essentially this is all thanks to the f pawn pushing and our queen and bishop lining up as a battery. So now the bishop on e6 is hanging. So really nice trick here. Queen a2 just preventing that f pawn
F5.
from pushing.
Yeah. So Queen A2, and now Black is basically thinking, because now he realizes he cannot play F5. So his options will be, usually you need to ask yourself, what is my opponent's idea? His last move in this case is to stop F5, and then the question is, do I want to keep insisting on F5? If so, how can I do that? Now that I know if F5 vulnerables the bishop, maybe I want to defend it first, and then play f5. So play something like, let's say, rook a8, right? But then once again, this is what I was saying, that after something like bishop b5, this pin becomes pretty annoying, especially with all these, the queen and the rook now
Yeah,
on the same diagonal, right?
for
So
sure.
that's probably what Balaji is considering, if he wants to allow that. Another option might be something like knight d8 maybe, but I'm not a big fan of it because it sort of closes the rook from getting into the game, right?
Yeah.
The pro will be that now I can play f5 without having to worry about the bishop, but I don't know if I want to make this concession just to get f5. Maybe that's what Balai is assessing, but we will see. He's taking his time. He has more time on the clock also, so it's not such a big deal. I think he will probably take like 10 minutes and then decide what to play here. But looking pretty interesting. I'll say like the whole match. I think it's pretty even. Let me take a look at our board too. Andre against Dan Basurin. How are they doing?
Andre's getting pretty low on time. He's used over half of his clock, and Batsurin is still over an hour left with the black pieces as well. And I do want to point out Dan Batsurin is the rating favorite for sure. Um, so how's Fuss hanging in there?
Fuss. What do you
Or
mean
sorry,
fuss?
Makave.
Oh yeah. So basically, this is where we left the game after knight f1. And here apparently Tambasuri was taking his time to play d5, and this leads to a lot of complications, right? Which needed to be calculated. That's why he took his time. After takes, takes, takes.
Wow.
I'm gonna assume this is all
Takes and takes
theory.
again.
Then takes
Oh,
and
oh.
takes, you know, and
Another takes.
and another
No.
take. No, not yet. Yeah, there you go. Trade, and trade.
Then
Now I'm
okay.
attacking on f2.
Yeah.
Therefore,
you gotta
I
defend
can
that.
attack on b7. So bishop e3, another takes, and c6, and we get this position, right? Equally material. Um, I would think it's pretty close to be equal. Honestly, I don't see. Maybe the only argument that white can say is like the a5 pawn might become weak at some point. Like it might become a target in certain scenarios. But overall, pretty solid position for black, I would think. Most often than not, I think this game will end in a draw. But we will see. Let's see how the game continues. He played rook d1, and now black is sort of taking his time to
This is a
decide.
live position.
He wants to play rook d8 and trade rooks in this way. That might be an option. Or if he wants to just play something like h6 maybe.
Yeah, I like h6. You know what the chess bras have been calling that recently?
Who are the chess bros?
You don't know?
No.
Eric Hansen and Amon Hamilton.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. What did they say?
So normally I like to call that luft, right?
Luft.
But what they call it now what's trending is a snorkel.
I don't know.
Letting the king breathe.
This sounds like Gen Z terms I'm not aware of. You know, like the other
Yeah.
day I was hanging out with some people and somebody say slay or like EP, and I'm like, what language are they talking about? You know, but yeah,
EP.
I don't know
I don't know that one either.
I don't know those things, man.
That's a different. Okay,
it's
so.
a different generation.
But yeah. H6 lift for the king. It's making sure that the black king doesn't get back rank mated, which is pretty important.
Right.
That's
The only con of h6 will be maybe rook d7. This might be an argument. Allowing the rook to the 7 rank might be annoying for black. But I think that's why he's considering between h6 and rook d8. Probably rook d8 what will happen in the game, as I don't see any way to take advantage of this back rank issue as of right now.
Do you think rook d8 is a little drawish? Just trading more pieces.
You mean if he will lead to a draw most likely?
Yeah.
Yeah. I will think so, and I think that's black's goal. I mean, like I think that Basurin is trying to just neutralize and leave his teammates with the white pieces to push. But I think most likely our first two boards will be a draw. Like and then on board 3, I think Balaji's game still a fight. I think that one can end either way. And then on Aditya's game, our board 4, I think he's just gonna push as much as he can, and hopefully he's able to convert. So I think so far UTD has a pretty good prospect in this match. I will think.
Okay. Yeah, and SLU is technically the second seed, so they are the favorite in this matchup. Dallas, the third seed.
Hmm.
So that would be a good result for our hometown team.
Hmm.
So maybe we take a look at the other match between.
Well, let me take a look at
Oh,
Ivan's game.
back to our top board here, really quick.
Let's see, Bishop C4, continue the game. We were saying that this endgame most likely will end in a draw, but once again, it depends if either one of them want to try to push a little bit, right? So in this case, I mean, Ivan's just expanding on the
Oh,
queen
we
side.
might trap that bishop, Brian.
Maybe.
How would you react
Let's
to
say
this? There's a couple ideas.
turn around, I play H3, suddenly A4, and boom, we go home, you know? Like, offer draw, they say no,
Big win.
and we cry, so no. So then A4, he plays A3.
Okay.
I'll stop in this A4 thing, and now C5.
What are your thoughts on A3 versus? There's a couple of alternatives, right? You could play A4. You could play C3.
So I will say in general, I don't want to place my pawns in the same squares, the same color as my bishop, right? I think that's the argument for playing A3 instead of A4. You want to keep your pawns in the opposite color of your bishop. That's why he played A3. And then interesting, like he plays C5. For example, if maybe he were to get something like C4, then bishop A2, the bishop will be out of the game, and then White will sort of be a piece down virtually, you know. And now I think that Robbie is deciding how to continue here because he might end up in trouble here if not played precisely. Let's say he might need to play C3, but then maybe something like C4 followed by knight E6 and then knight C5 might be annoying. I I think it's still a fight. Maybe it won't be such a quick easy draw. But we will see here what happens.
Yeah, that's why I think maybe C3 first,
Instead of A4, or instead of A3, or what?
or something you had
you mean
mentioned
here?
earlier. Yeah, A3, like not really a waste of a tempo if it induced black to play C5.
Right. Maybe that was the goal, but I think black's pretty comfortable here. I don't see white pushing here honestly. But we will see, I guess. We will see. But let's take a look at let's say
Yeah, this is a game I don't think we've looked at yet.
no, we haven't.
So Yasser Casada Perez, player from Cuba, from Webster,
Hmm.
playing against Jose Cordosa
Cardoso, yeah.
from UT Rio Grande, and maybe we just quickly go from the top and see what we missed.
Yasser play E4. I think he's a pretty diverse player, but usually he plays E4, C5, knight F3, D6 Sicilian, right? D4 takes knight F6, knight. Oh, and he goes for F3. This is known as the Prince. I used to play this actually when I started playing the game because most often than not, people don't try to punish you. They just keep developing their pieces, and then the goal of F3 is basically playing C4 before developing your knight to C3. In this way, you get some sort of Maroczy bind, right? With this pawn structure. With having the pawn on C4 helps to control the D5 square, and therefore you want to get as much as possible. Of course, in a normal Sicilian, it's not possible because the knight has to go to C3 and defend the pawn. Therefore, C4 is not possible anymore, and that's why F3 is sort of interesting trying to achieve that, right? But the cons are that black now has E5, right? Since I delay my development, now black can try to quickly fight in the center. So E5, knight B3, and bishop E7. That's interesting. I know like the main move here is like D5. I don't know how out of date my theory is. Maybe this is considered to be good for white nowadays. Sometimes he will continue something like check, and then bishop G5. Black will need to go something like D4, c3, and sometimes black even gives up this pawn and sort of plays on the compensation for the pair of bishops. But in this case, black just decides to say, you know what, I'm gonna play bishop e7, I'm gonna castle, and then I see what I do. You know, it's no big deal. So c4, this is what I was telling you. If you can get the pawn to c4 before you develop your knight, that's ideal because in that way you have more control over the d5 square. a5, that's the typical reaction also here. Whenever there's a knight either on g3 or b3, you want to try to kick it out by getting tempi by either playing a5 or in the case of g3, h5. And therefore that's the idea of a5. Knight c3, knight c6, and bishop e3. I'm curious why not a4. Maybe it just loses a pawn. Because let's say I could make an argument saying that a4 first in order to not allow the bishop to get to e3, right?
Exactly.
But in this case, he plays knight c6 first, and now bishop e3 and castle. Maybe a4 is not so relevant right now. Maybe he just wants to develop his pieces. At the same time, though, based on the time situation, I have the impression that Cardoso was coming out with moves on the board. I don't think he expected this. I'm pretty sure this is something that Yasser prepared maybe just for this game, and therefore that's why he's low on time, and it's also why maybe he's just developing normally and allowing White to get his ideal setup, right? So bishop e2, a4, knight e2, and knight d4, castle, bishop e6, bishop d3, a4, a3, b3. As we were saying, like in Balaji's game, right? Having a pawn all the way on the 6th rank is quite annoying. Same thing here. This pawn a3 is quite an issue for White. At the same time, there's no real way to take advantage of it right now, so White would just continue with rook c1 and then decide what to do. So knight d7, black continues improving his pieces, getting the knight to c5. You always want to ask yourself, what's the ideal square, let's say, for this knight? In this case, the c5 square is pretty good for the knight. So White continues with rook c1. You might asking yourself, why rook c1? Like, the rook is not going to do anything on the c5. Why am I even doing this?
I have a hunch. I have a guess.
So
if you want to tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Okay, you tell me.
Okay, so you mentioned the previous move, black brought the knight back to d7, trying to get to c5. What I noticed is that hits our bishop, our light square bishop. So if I am expecting my bishop to get hit by their knight, probably I want to find a new square for the bishop if I want to hold on to it. And if I bring the bishop back, either just one square to e2 or to c2, their other knight could take it. So that leaves us with b1, but I don't want to get my rook blocked. So
you got a point there.
Rook c. Was that what you're gonna say?
Okay. Yeah,
All right.
that's what I was gonna say. Yeah, definitely. Also, I think also plus is sometimes not always, but let's say I might play knight e5 and after takes, then the rook plays a role in the c file. You know, that's another reason, sort of. But yeah, the main one was, let's say something like rook e1 and knight c5. You don't want to play bishop b1 here. This will be horrible. Then actually having the pawn an a3, it becomes quite an issue for White as he cannot develop his rook on a1, right?
Yeah.
So rook c1, knight c5, bishop b1, and knight c6. So this is the current position. I don't know who I prefer, honestly. Maybe black, because it looks like he has more space with not that much in return. Maybe the only issue that black has is the d5 square, but as of right now, it's not such a big deal. Let's say. Also, the pieces on the bishop on b1 is not doing that much. I don't really like that bishop, so maybe I'll prefer black. Let's say his next move might be something like knight b4, you know, like even more crumbling White's position. So yeah, we will see what Yasser has in his preparation here or his analysis.
Yeah.
I'm not
you
sure.
mentioned Jose's a little low on time, and Yasser maybe throwing him off with this prince variation that you mentioned with f3 out of the Sicilian. I think this last move confuses me a little bit. That knight looks really good to me in the center on d4, but you're pointing out going to b4, maybe the knights converge on d3, which would be pretty annoying.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think white's pieces are a bit more cramped. Black's pieces maybe have a little bit more space, but
Mm-hmm.
you pointed out d5. I think knight d5 makes a lot of sense here for white, but I'm not sure what the follow-up was. I would never take that knight if I were black, because then that bishop on b1 that's locked out
Mm-hmm.
could open up. You mentioned maybe taking with the c pawn to open up the rook, but I would take, I think, with the e pawn.
Yeah, in this case, maybe taking with the e-pawn might be better because then my bishop gets into the game, right? I would just need to look out for some sort of f5. Also, I don't want to allow the trade of the dark square bishops, but could be a potential option. But honestly, I don't know what white is trying to do with this knight on d2. This is usually the issue of this setup. That's why black play a5, a4. They kicked out my knight, and now the knight on d2 doesn't really have an ideal square here. That's the main issue. It's all his squares are blocked by its own pawns, right? So yeah, I think most likely we will see knight d5, and then just depends on how Cardoso reacts to. I think this is what's gonna happen. Let me take a look if it has been played. No, not yet. Just are taking his time. As always, as a rule, I see a lot of time when people they see their opponent long time. They try to play even faster. I will say uh, if you have extra time, the only advantage of having the extra time is to use it, and therefore I would recommend to always take your time whenever you feel necessary. And I think that's what Yasser is doing here. He's evaluating his options before he commits to 95 or not, because he understands that if he doesn't do anything concrete, like let's say he just keeps passing the ball, black is gonna slowly but surely gonna kind of like an anaconda, like a what's the word for that? Like
Constrict.
constrict, correct? Yeah. So yeah, we will see what happens here. This is I would say looking good for black. Let's see how's Harshan doing. This is the position we were looking at before. We stopped after g4. This is what happened in the game. a3, h6, bishop e5, some sort of pull back and forward, and king f1. Now,
Wow.
this is a good move. You don't want to castle once you already play g4, especially because the rook on h1 is more useful than on f1. It won't go to e1 or c1, therefore it's just better to keep it on h1, and then you artificially castle, right?
Are you sure it's not a mouse slip?
Mm, no. Oh wait, maybe. Who knows? But yeah, I think he's gonna play king g2, and then try to sort of claim that he has more space on the king side. Because let's say something like castle, castle. Where would you like to take this knight, Joe? Ideally,
e5.
e5 is one square.
Or okay, actually, are you thinking h4 to f5?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I think this could be a pretty good square for the black knight. Once again, always remember this pattern. Whenever there's a pawn on g7
Yes.
and h6, having a knight on f5 basically puts pressure on g7, and then whenever the g7 is moved, h6 becomes vulnerable, and therefore having the knight on f5 against this sort of pawn structure tends to be quite annoying for your opponent. I think that could be a potential plan. I don't know. And then of course also if let's say black passes the move, I don't know, rook c8, whatever. If g6, this also weakens the king side, right? And weakening your king side is always a concession, something else to be on the lookout for. I don't think knight takes here works right away, but maybe something like f4, you know. And now we will see which king is in more danger, right? Probably the black one. So
Yeah, that knight sacrifice looks really
interesting also, yeah.
because you're getting three pawns for
Pawns.
the knight, so it's technically an even trade. Uh, but the question is whether or not white has enough juice to follow.
Yeah, because he doesn't have enough pieces in the attack yet.
Yeah.
I would think that it's a little bit rushed, but the idea of like for black to constantly having to worry about that, it's a constant pain in his head, right? And therefore, that's something that you provoke also with knight h4. So Actually, he already castle, so it's white to move here. I would think most often. No, he'll probably play King G2 first,
King G2.
and then decide what to do. Yeah, usually before taking any action, I did this issue many times, mistake many times. Is like people try to rush into the complications where when they haven't even prepared their pieces for them, you know. So in this case, you want to first get your king to a safe square, connect the rooks, and then you can start thinking about improving your remaining pieces, right? But before you take some sort of action, you first want to be sure that you have everything coordinated, you know. So yeah, I think it's looking good for white. Let's see a Lazarus game, how he's doing. This is board two. This is UTRGB with the white pieces. Sean Rodriguez, if I'm not mistaken, he was the War Under 18 U champion.
That sounds right to me.
From Canada. Yeah,
of course.
from Canada.
Rodriguez Lemieux.
A big shout out to Razan Perotu if he's watching this stream. Probably not, but I hope he's doing fine. Previous teammate from UTD, also from Canada. Against so Sean against Lazaro Broussard from Cuba. I think at some point, I think his peak rating was 27-17, which is quite impressive if you ask me. And he has a black pieces, so let's see how the game develops pretty quickly. C4. Sean usually switches between C4 and E4. Against Lazaro, I would think he wanted a more solid approach, so he went for C4, E5, G3. Sean tends to play with a fianquido. D5, takes, knife 3, knight C6. It's quite interesting actually. So this is basically a reverse Sicilian, right? Black basically has it's a tempi down, but basically if he's able to develop normally, then the pawn E5, it's pretty useful to control the center, and it will be like a reverse dragon sort of. Let's see how it continues. Knight C3 and Queen D8. You know what's funny? I actually played this against Sean like a couple of months ago, but instead of going to D8, I went to D6. I don't know, like I don't think that game's in the database. It might be. Maybe they got it, but
Where did you play this game?
we played in Texas Super Finals 2024. In round 3, I was black, and we drew in the end. And in that game, I played Queen D6 with the same idea, like getting just some sort of a reverse Sicilian, you know. But in this case, Lazaro goes for the Queen D8, and I'm pretty sure this was his preparation. I don't know how trendy this is right now. But Bishop G2, Knight F6, Castle, and H6. And yeah, so I was saying, if black is allowed to get all these traditional normal moves like, I don't know, either Bishop C5, Bishop E7, Castle, it would just be a reverse Sicilian with an extra tempi for white, but if he's not able to use that extra tempi, then black will have equalized with no issues, right? So D3, Bishop E7, B3, Castle, Bishop B2. I think normal development, nothing special here. Rook E8, trying to get the bishop to F8 out of the way, and also that way the rook can protect the pawn E5 in case it were to ever be on attacked. Rook C1 and Rook B8. That's interesting. What do you think of this Rook B8, Joe?
Well, the rook on the corner could be potentially a target for the fianchetto bishop, but this tells me that Lazaro probably wants to push the B pawn. You couldn't go to B5 right away because of white's knight, but now it's supported by the rook. So, yeah, I think if you push the pawn, even just one square, right, trying to fianchetto your light square bishop, then white already has a tactic. You can take the pawn on E5. So I think that is my analysis.
Yeah, I think just to cover the pawn B7 in case he ever needs to move the knight and move the bishop, because eventually he will have to, right? He needs to complete his development, so maybe it's just like a prophylaxis applied here with Rook B8. White continues with Knight A4, trying to get that knight to C5, and now Black just plays Bishop D6 now. Protects the pawn, opens the rook. Potentially at some point can free this knight, although right now I don't see a good square for it. Let's say knight e7 is not possible, or knight e4. He will lose a pawn on either case. But I mean, black is trying to consolidate basically. Sean continues with knight d2, trying to maneuver the other knight now to c4, and that's where he plays knight e7, right? Because now that the pawn e5 is not under pressure, he's able to also maneuver his own pieces. And I think black is quite comfortable here. I would think, I don't know how much in theory still Lazar is. I would think they both are playing by now. They are out of prey by now, and I think it should be a fight, but I think black should be fine here. Let's say queen c2, knight g6, improving the knight to the other side, defending g6. Sorry, defending e5. Rook fd1. Sean basically is telling you, you know, I don't care about what you do here on the king side. I'm gonna try to eventually push maybe d4 in some way and try to open up the d and c files. I mean, as you can see, all his pieces are pointing towards this, which what black has two options basically. He can either ignore it and try to take advantage of the fact that white move all his pieces to the queen side, maybe by starting some sort of attack with h5 could be an option, followed by h4. That might be too slow though. Or the other option will be sort of, yeah, I mean, he's trying to create as many problems as possible, as soon as possible. Otherwise, he knows if he allows white to get this knight c4, d4, open the d5, black will be in trouble. So bishop g4. And now, black's attacking e2, right? And so, what will be your most normal reply here, Joe?
I would probably move the knight on d2
Mm-hmm.
and defend the e pawn with our queen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm considering knight c4 as you had mentioned.
Right, I think knight c4 will be the most normal move, and I would think that the idea of Lazar against knight c4 is to play b5. You know, and now all this whole rook ba idea is connected now. Okay, I'm attacking both knights, therefore the only possible move is knight takes d6. I take with a pawn, of course. I don't want to leave a weakness on c7, so pawn takes. And after knight c3, suddenly, after all these changes, I will say black is pretty comfortable in this position because, first of all, I got rid of this c7 weakness. I have a more solid structure. I have developed all my pieces, right? There's no b7 weakness anymore. And therefore, I would think black is doing completely fine here. Maybe even try to trade pieces. Let's say trade his life square bishop, you know, will be ideal for black. And therefore, I think that's why Sean is taking his time. Let me check he already played. No, he hasn't played yet. Yeah, I think he's evaluating how is he doing after this resulting position, you know?
Yeah, maybe another idea would be to go knight e4.
Right. But then the issue with that one will be that it allows a trade of pieces, which usually the side with less space wants to avoid. In this case, I will say knight takes, bishop takes, or yeah, it has to be bishop takes. Pawn takes, even though it opens the d5, closes this bishop. This looks pretty bad, honestly. So probably knight bishop takes. Then I don't know how worried I am about you taking on g6. How worried are you, Joe, about that?
No.
It's all right.
I don't think white would give up the being cut
No
bishop
issues?
for a knight.
Not like us. Not like us, maybe. Yeah.
Because black still has their light square bishop, and if that bishop gets to h3, then white's not going to have a good time.
Yeah, yeah. Only scenario I'll be concerned will be something like, let's say, f6 takes, and then maybe f3, followed by e4. But even this, and then d4, something like this. But even then, I'm not sure if I'm gonna miss my last for bishop. Probably, yeah. But how big of a deal it is, you know? Anyway, I don't think he will play knight e4, honestly. I think Or maybe he will.
Well,
Maybe he doesn't like.
how else would you defend the
That's
e
true.
pawn, right? So
That's true.
unless you play rook e1
That's
or
true.
push like
Also
the
important to point out, maybe f5 is also a move here.
f5 is possible. There's a check.
Check.
There's maybe two checks even
There's
actually.
the checks. That's true.
But
That's true.
king probably just moves and then yeah, I like black here. I think
Maybe I need to just go back, then decide what to do. But
yeah.
yeah, it's not quite clear. I yeah, I'll probably play knight e4 since I'm not a big fan of this resulting position. Oh wait, he did play knight c4 already. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So I think most likely we will see b5. I think that's Lazarus' idea.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll see anything else.
And both these players are less than 40 minutes on their clock, so time's winding down. We're going to start seeing some action pick up as these games are getting towards the end game. But I wanted to give a shout out to all the viewers that have tuned in. We've got Magpie has been here for quite some time. We had Sack Checkmate, who is known as International Master Alex Katz, tuning in. We've got Jenny, and we had another streamer, Emily, tuning in from Charlotte. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I think we're gonna take a break here.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Before the action starts ramping up.
Are you hungry?
Yeah, I think we're due for some time here.
We deserve it for the hard work. Yeah. Let's get some food.
All right. How's that sound, Daryl? All right. thanks for sticking around, and also thanks to anyone else that have tuned in since then. As a reminder, this is the President's Cup, also known as the Final Four of the U.S. College Chess Championship. This is a team event. 4 teams have qualified from Pan Am's, which was just about 3 months ago. And yeah, we have our first round underway, just about over halfway done. We've had UT Dallas up against St. Louis University and University of Texas Rio Grande up against Webster University. Brian, where have we left off?
So last thing we saw, I mean, it's been, how many hours has it been since the round started? 2 hours and a half, right? And still all the games are going on, which means there's some fight going on in all the matches. What do you say if we first take a look at how the hometown team is doing, UTD?
Of course.
See how the games develop since we left them. So last thing we looked at was this position after c5. We were saying that potentially black could try to get his bishop out of the game.
Real quick, Brian.
Yes.
Who are these players and what teams are they on?
That's true. Good question, Joe. So this match is between SLU, St. Louis University, with the white pieces. Their player is the Grandmaster from Netherlands, Robbie Kevishvili, against UTD with the black pieces, Grandmaster Ivan Skitsko from Moldova. This is where we left the game. Last time we were saying that c5 could potentially get the bishop out of the game. So c3, c4, bishop c2, and I honestly thought, like, visually speaking, the black should be fine, but maybe putting these pawns in the light squares have become a potential weakness for black in the long run. And now Ivan decides to go for b4. It's a pretty concrete move. I would say most often than not, if the position is equal, I would say just keep things calm and then decide what to do. In this case, Ivan decided to push right away with b5, a5, c5, and maybe this could potentially create problems for himself, as now, as you were pointing out, that the bishop, it tends to be favorable in open positions in any endgame, right? I think this might be the case where white might be able to get like a pass pawn here. This pawn c4 might become weak. Let's say, yeah, pawn takes, check, king e4.
Are these moves coming in live?
Yes, these moves are coming in live. We have premium VIP broadcasts. We don't have to wait for the 10 minutes. And yeah, this is what I was worried about.
Oh my goodness.
The pawn on c4 will fall, and even if black tries to get counterplay on this flank, it's gonna be pretty hard once again, because this bishop is a monster in either supporting the pass pawn on b2, but also in protecting white's pawn. Like, imagine as soon as I just place my pawn on h3 and my bishop either on e4 or f3, then I don't need to worry about these pawns. I can just keep pushing my own pass pawn, and black has pretty little counterplay. So yeah, this is looking quite dangerous for black. I mean the evaluation is saying it's already winning for white. But
wow. No, that is actually a huge update. This is probably the most convincing position we've seen so far. This is the first round of the event, and looks like Robbie Kevishvili, captain, board 1 from St. Louis University, should be able to get a full point out of this position, thanks to Ivan pushing prematurely on the queen side, creating a weakness for himself in a position that we thought was completely even.
Yeah, I mean, we thought most likely it would end in a draw, unless, as I told you, like, someone tries to overpush or something. I think this is what happened in this case. I don't think black needed to create these light square weaknesses on c4 and b5, and that's what led us to this position, right? And now Ivan is trying to come out with some sort of idea or trick in order to complicate the position, because the thing is that it's not only that I mean, the evaluation is saying it's winning or whatever. It's more about also from the human point of view. It's pretty easy to see what white moves will be in the next couple of moves. For example, he would just take the pawn, play king d4, king c4, then start pushing the b pawn, and this bishop will take care of protecting the g and h pawns. and there's not really that much counterplay for black. That's the main issue here. Like it's a position that you could say people might even win in blitz, you know, without even putting too much effort. That's the main issue here. So maybe Ivan is able to come out with some sort of trick or defense here, hopefully for UTD. But so far, it's looking like Robbie should be able to convert for first slew. So yeah, we will see. We can take a look at the other games to see how the rest of the match is going. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, we definitely have to know how the other boards are doing because this match format is a team format. So even if Robbie wins as board one for his team, that doesn't mean that his team would win because he still needs his other boards to get some results. So let's take a look at the lower boards in this match.
Let's see. So that was board one. Board two, we have with the white pieces, International Master Andrei Makovey from Moldova against Grandmaster Batsurin Dambasurin from Mongolia. And we left up at this position after Rook D1. We were saying most likely it will end a draw after some simplifications. So white play Rook D1. Black continue Rook D8. As I was saying, black wants to trade pieces and just reach an equal endgame. White took, queen takes, and G3. Yeah, and now white would just try to slowly improve his position with moves like H4, maybe eventually some Knight F5, H5. White is definitely preferable here. I would say if anyone is pushing for the win here, it's definitely white, especially with these sort of weaknesses like A5 and B7. But most often than not, if black plays properly, it should be close to a draw here. So G3, Knight F8, King G2. White just slowly improves his position, Knight E6, and Knight C4. Attacking on A5, also kind of asking black, so what are you going to do next? Because now the queen is tied up to the defense of the A5 pawn. Then Basurin play H6, just giving a square for his king. How do you call it? The loof? Is that what it's called nowadays?
Loof. Well, the popular term, thanks to chess bras, I would say is the snorkel.
The snorkel.
Yeah, so that lets black's king breathe a little bit. Similar idea, but yes. Also, just again, a reminder, Batsurin with the black pieces is representing the St. Louis University team, playing against Andrei Makovey with the white pieces representing UT Dallas.
Correct. So what I would think is going on right now in the matches is that Andrei is looking at Ivan's board. He sees that he's going to lose, and he understands that somehow he needs to create as many problems as possible in order to equal the match, right?
That's right, and it's got to be hard as a teammate seeing your other teammates not doing so well and not being able to help them. Really, they're strict about communication, right?
Yeah. No, I mean you cannot communicate with your teammates during the matches. All you can do is look at their boards, try to assess what's going on, and then play based on that. And so, I think here Andrei might try to push, but most often than not, I think black should be able to equalize. Let's say B3.
Oh, not a fan of B3. I thought putting the pawn on A4 puts the pawn even deeper into white's territory, making that pawn even potentially more susceptible to attack. It's already kind of eyed by the queen on E4 through the knight. So I assume if the knight moved maybe to E5, that would be a strong idea. Do you think Batsurin would have to play something like queen? Okay, yeah. You're pointing out knight.
Queen A5, probably something like this. And yeah, I mean black. Once again, I think black is fine. The main thing is that he doesn't have that many weaknesses apart from A4. And then if white is not able to coordinate any sort of attack against the pawn A4, then the position should be equal. As one weakness that cannot be taken advantage of, just leaves the position equal, and therefore here Andrei play B3. Maybe just trying to simplify more the position. And now it's Dambasurin's turn. I'm curious what Andre is playing against. Pawn takes knight c5. I would think queen c2, but yeah, maybe. I mean, this move b3 tells me, I'm just gonna try to simplify a little bit and maybe just go for a draw. Maybe I don't know because like I don't see it as a move that is trying to push or create pressure, because it's getting rid of black's a4 pawn. So yeah, we will see. I still think this game will most likely end in a draw. Honestly.
Well, we thought that about Robbie's game.
That's true. That's true. That's
So
true.
lots of chess left to be played in this particular game, but I just want to give a huge shout out to Botez Live, who just rated us with over 3,000 viewers.
Jesus Christ,
So-
I'm famous, mom. Turn on the TV.
Hopefully some of them will stick around for the 10-minute delay to hear our verbal shout out. But yeah, thank you and welcome. I believe Botez is currently in Paris, France. For some event going on. Maybe some of the viewers that stuck around can let us know. But yes, welcome. And again, this is the President's Cup happening live at UT Dallas. This is going to determine the U.S. College Team Championship. And this is round 1. So we will be back again later today. Round 2 will start at 5 p.m. Eastern. And the final round will actually be happening tomorrow, Sunday, at 11 a.m. Eastern. So hopefully we'll see you all back again tomorrow to find the conclusion of this tournament that determines the championship of the U.S. colleges. So, yeah, right now we're looking at St. Louis University versus UT Dallas. And board 1's looking really good for SLU.
Yeah.
But board 2 maybe is a bit more of a draw or an even position. And now this is board 3 you're about to show us?
Correct. This is white with the white pieces. Nico Lisi, grandmaster from Georgia, from SLU against grandmaster Balaji Dagupati from California, who plays for UTD. We were saying this position after queen a2. f5 wasn't possible because of the tactics of knight b6. The bishop a6 will be hanging, and therefore I thought Balaji was deciding how to protect the bishop so f5 becomes possible, right? We were saying rook a8, but then, as we were pointing out, the issue with rook e8 is that now after bishop b5, this pin becomes pretty annoying. Now that it's not only the queen, but also the rook that will need to move to free this pin, and that's actually what happened in the game. So after bishop b5, Balaji continued with queen c8, queen a4, bishop d7.
Wow.
Always, I would say, whenever you see this kind of move happening, like this kind of what's called trend, right? It's probably because something went wrong. Like if black needed to go all the way to c8, bishop d7, then white got what he wanted, which was the counterplay on the queen side, right?
That's a lot of momentum.
Yeah, momentum is pretty important. Definitely.
Brian, I have a crazy idea.
Go ahead.
Hear me out. Can white sacrifice the knight on b6 to push, or are you just thinking something calm and simple like d4?
So knight takes b6, for example, will be something to consider if it wouldn't be for the case that the two rooks are still on the 8th rank, and therefore this pawn will pretty unlikely become something to worry about based on having these two rooks covering a8. Then d4, it's possible, although I don't know if we actually get something here after rook takes c4. I think black just wins a pawn. I think the main thing that white should do is try to improve the piece that is not contributing to the game. This knight on d5 is ideally placed. This bishop also and the queen are doing a great job paralyzing the knight and the bishop, and therefore now you want to improve this guy right here. So what would you try to improve it, Joe? What do you think will be the best square for this knight?
So are we going to d2 to c4?
Correct. And then we start creating more problems for white. And also in this way we prepare for eventually meeting this sort of f5, and by not having the knight on f3 hanging in certain lines when let's say black takes on h3. So knight d2 was played, rook d8. Probably needed to play in this defensive way because white's constantly putting pressure. Knight
Knight
c4.
c4, and now
And now Balaji, I think this is what is called by Alexander Yermolinsky in his book. What is it called? Road to Champion. Do you know? A Road to Chess Improvement, I think. So basically, there's a moment in these games where you need to decide if you want to keep suffering or if you want to go all in. And I think this is what Balaji did. I think here he decided, if I go bishop a8 because I need to defend the pawn d6, then okay, I'm holding for another move, but I mean, it's pretty clear that things have gone wrong for black at this point, right? Like it's with the bishop on a8, any sort of idea of attack here on the king side becomes kind of useless. And also now we are talking about ideas of taking on b6,
exactly, yeah, especially if the bishop had stayed.
Because now the rooks are not connected also. That's another factor. And then after that, a7 might become an actual threat eventually. And therefore, Balaji was like, you know what?
Let's go for it.
Let's go for it. It's
Creating
all
chaos
in.
on the board.
It's all in. Especially now, this is something also you should always take a look at. Is whenever pieces move away from the king side and the king becomes, the king's alone now, you can start thinking about some kind of attacks on the king side. And that's what Balaji does, basically. He takes on h3, trying to go for counterplay. He took, and queen takes. Now, if white doesn't do anything, then of course we will go for the perpetual. I think black is more than fine with a draw here. And that's why Nicolisi had to go back with the queen to cover this check. And Balaji goes for f5. He understands that any other move, like a slow move, such as knight b7, knight b8, defend the knight, or rook c8, whatever, is pointless at this point. He needs to go all in. Otherwise, he would just be a piece down and we'll lose the game pretty simply. So that's why he needs to go for f5. Also taking advantage of the fact that he has half an hour on the clock while Nicolisi has 9 minutes. I'm pretty sure all the sacrifice and playing f5 made Nicolisi spend a lot of time, which is something that Balaji is also counting on. I think it's important to take a look at your resources, in this case, playing against your opponent's time whenever you're in a worse position. So he plays f5. Nicolisi plays knight e3.
So really quickly,
Yeah.
I just can't help but notice the knight on c6 is just hanging out.
Correct.
Right? What happens if we take that knight?
If we take this knight right now, I think after the move f4, we're threatening both f3, and if you were to play something like f3 yourself, then
Perpetual.
at least I have a perpetual. I don't know if more. Probably not more than that, but yeah, at least I have perpetual. And then I don't think there's any comfortable way to stop f3. And then once f3 gets on the board, it gets pretty hard for white to defend because now his pieces are going to be disconnected from the king side, right? That's why Nicolisi probably took his time and understood that he needs to bring his pieces back as soon as possible. That's why he played knight c3. Also important to notice that now every time, let's say something like f4 were to happen, of course we don't move the knight because then we will allow f3. But we have this important intermediate move, queen g4, right? And now black is forced to trade queens. There's no other way. And after that, white will just be a piece up. And therefore, this move knight c3, it's quite strong because it stops most of black's threats basically on the king side. Same idea with pawn takes. I can probably also take, or
now can we take the knight?
Or even queen g4. You mean right away take the knight here?
Yeah.
I guess you could. I will need to calculate if there's any issues with taking the knight.
Black's got nothing.
Yeah, most likely there's nothing because this knight on e3 is a beast defending all possible sort of attacks. And once again, it's hard for black to incorporate more pieces into the attack. If there was any other way to bring the rooks to either f4 or g5 somehow, magically speaking, but it's pretty hard for black to create any attack with only the queen. You cannot only attack with one piece. So yeah, f5, knight c3, h5. Balaji now tries to incorporate his bishop into the attack through h5.
Also covering g4.
Also covering g4 in case I want to play f4. Correct. Yeah, that's another idea to point out. That's why Nicolisi took. Pawn takes, and now he took the knight.
Wow.
So he's saying, if you don't kill me here, I'm 2 pieces up.
Yeah, that's a 2-piece sacrifice now from Balaji, and this is an absolute desperation, seeing that Robbie is winning for Slew on top board, and if Nicolosi can hold on to this win, that's 2 points on 2 boards. That's not looking good for Dallas.
Yeah, that'll be pretty rough. In Balaji's case, I don't think he went for this because he saw the first board how Ivan is doing. I think it was more because his position just demanded him to go for an all-in in a worse position. But yeah, I mean the only thing that we can count on will be the fact of the time. But with two pieces and no clear way to continue the attack, I will think that White should have enough time to convert his extra piece here.
So, Brian, as a UT Dallas player,
Yeah.
I am really grateful to be here live in person on campus, and I wanted to share that yesterday I was walking around seeing the playing venue, obviously seeing a bit more of the campus, but I saw that your team actually has its own room with a lot of trophies in it and a lot of chessboards, and I saw that after the dinner, your teammates were all in there preparing, presumably for this event and for this match in particular. Do you want to walk us through a little bit about what that experience is like? Like, what exactly are you guys going through? Are you looking at your opponent's particular lines that they play? Are you looking at chess base? Are you guys playing against each other?
So you mean as preparation for this sort of events? You mean
Yeah.
basically? So I mean, of course I cannot reveal all the secrets and details of UTD, right? But I mean, overall, I would say it's just the most typical training is just preparing for the opponents. Like predicting what could be the outcome of certain openings, trying to find the right match setup. Let's say who should play against who, based on either styles or opening repertoire. Also, who has a better score. Sometimes even like it happens, like some players they have lower rating than their opponents. Sorry, more rating than their opponents, but they just constantly keep losing to the same opponent over and over and again. I don't know if that ever happened to you. Like me, for example, there was this guy who in Peru, I think his score against me was like 7-1. Even when I keep increasing my rating. And last time I played against him, I was already 2300. He was still 1800, and I finally beat him. And he's like, okay, now it's 7-1. We don't play anymore. And I'm like, okay, fair. That's fair. But yeah, I mean, it does sometimes it does happen things like this, and then okay, this is an exaggerated example, right? But sometimes that also plays a matter in who plays who. Like who do you feel more comfortable playing against, basically. And so yeah, I mean, we just prepare certain lines, practice as much as possible because school also takes a lot of time with exams and projects and everything. And so yeah, just try to get with the coach, prepare some lines, review some games, and just go from there basically. So that's what the routine usually here for White. I think it's pretty looking pretty good. Let's see what he played after F4. Actually, I'm curious. Oh, he took the pawn. Huh? He said, okay, I'm ready to give up some material back, right? Sometimes.
Yeah, he wants to prioritize his king safety. Also, when you're up two pieces,
Correct.
you have the luxury to give one back at least.
Yeah.
But this move I like in particular because not only are you
It
getting
frees the bishop also, right?
Yeah, the bishop now is on the long diagonal, can be really helpful to defend the king and flush the enemy queen out of there.
And also it stops f3 now. The bishop will be covering the square on f3. So that's probably why he played. Yeah, I feel like sometimes, also it's important to not try to be perfectionist in the sense of, let's say if Nicolisi has 10 minutes and he needs to find the way how to convert his position, he will go for the most practical option, like trying to keep all the pieces and holding to all the advantages sometimes can result in the opposite way of complicating yourself, So I think that's what he did with knight takes f4 basically.
Yeah, but this isn't the end of the story, right? Pawn takes back with the tempo, hitting the knight, and I guess black could still play for f3 depending on what white does here, so this isn't so easy.
For example, something like knight e5, which they should never play, will be just horrible. Either f3 or even like rook ga will run into trouble for white pretty easily. Same thing with knight g2, for example. f3 once again will become pretty annoying now.
Yeah, so what does white do?
Bishop e5. And therefore, I'm pretty sure he played knight takes a4 with this idea, which was the intermediate move, bishop g2. Pretty important. actually already playing the game. The idea is basically to kick out the queen, and then it needs to stay on h4, otherwise the attack is gone, and also the h5 pawn will fall, so he needs to play queen h4. And now after, I was thinking just knight d5, but maybe there might be an issue with f3 here. Let me think.
What issue do you see with f3?
Let me think. So
We can't take?
If I take, what's the issue?
The bishop comes in, and now we get mated?
Bishop e5. Bishop e5. Oh no, I still have f4 apparently.
Okay.
After this.
What's crazy?
But I think the issue is that I'm not in time to protect against a move like this apparently.
How does that work?
Because now if knight takes c3, I have rook g8.
Oh.
Only move bishop g2, and after queen h3, funny enough, there's no way to defend the bishop. Queen f3 will just.
Oh no, my queen.
The queen, yeah. And
Botez Gambit. Shout out to the raid earlier. So.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And so, yeah, that's why the bishop.
So this is very tricky.
The move bishop e4 is quite important. Once again, if now king g8, then we forget all these sort of ideas. Rook g8, right? So this check is quite important for that. So that's why Balaji goes to king h8, and now knight g2, right? It's important when you're defending, you know, tempi, especially when you're defending, yeah, and you're extra piece, tempi do matter a lot here, you know. So this check and then knight g2, getting the knight to protect the king, then probably playing f3 at some point, stopping black from playing f3 himself will be good enough to convert with extra piece for white. Again, continue queen h3 and queen f3, right?
Yes.
And now, yeah, I mean, black is forced to trade queens, and after that, black is just simply a piece down, right? And
well, the bishop can take on c3. You get like maybe 2 pawns out of it.
That's true.
Maybe some passed pawns.
That's
potential.
True. Also, he's low on time.
Yeah.
We're making some arguments, huh? For black.
So okay, let's trade. You don't want to keep queens on because the h pawn falls with check, right? So you trade queens. Now bishop c3, right? Where do you put the rook?
Now white's thinking. He's deciding.
Is this the current position?
Yeah, this is the current position. He's deciding where to place the rook, basically. I mean, the pawn on b4 is gonna be lost, 100%. Like
what if you just take on c5?
I was thinking that, but then I can take.
And then you take on b6.
But then I think I have bishop d4.
Okay, right? Okay.
And I mean, according to the engine, it's still advantage, and it should be, but I think the advantage has decreased a lot, right? Because based on the fact that now
you
black,
gave up a rook.
Yeah, you give up the rook basically with nothing concrete. I don't think white will go for this. Most likely, I think he will move the rook, and then decide how to make use of his extra piece, right? I mean, because that's what white needs to achieve. Makes use of the extra knight. Otherwise, the piece is useless, right?
Yeah.
It's not gonna be easy though with the time control, I would say, especially because you know it's not a let's say blitz sort of conversion position, you know, where you just automatically bring the rooks to the center and then you win. In this case, like actually e1 is being covered by the bishop, so rook e1 is not possible. That's what makes me think sometimes maybe rook a2 might be useful to play rook e2 and get to the e file. At the same time, then I need to worry about the b3 pawn. So yeah, maybe it's not that trivial. The conversion, definitely white should be winning here, but I mean, there's a reason why he's taking his time, right? Like he has 7 minutes against 25 minutes for black, so we will see here. Maybe Balaji is able to hold, although it is looking pretty bad for white, yeah.
So we've looked at the top 3 boards of this match.
Right, board 1.
Board 1 looks good for Robbie. Any updates here?
Robbie looks like,
yeah, you got that extra pawn.
Yeah, the extra pawn, and as I was saying, the main issue with this position is that the bishop, compared to the knight, can support the passed pawn while defending on g2 at the same time, while the knight takes a lot of time to move from one place to the other, you know, and therefore, eventually white will be able to divert the attention from black from from the king side by pushing his b pawn, and then he will eventually start taking these pawns on h6 and f5. And yeah, I don't really think black will hold here. It's some miracle waiting to happen, but yeah, I think it's pretty rough already.
So let this be a lesson to all you kids at home watching. Hold on to your bishops. Bishops are going to outpower the knights in these open endgames. This bishop can control both sides of the board, and there it goes, boxing out the knight's forward moves. And as you called it, the bishop is going to be the difference, and that extra pawn is going to keep black's pieces tied to it. Meanwhile, white can then focus on the other side of the board and mop up those two isolated pawns and win this endgame.
Yeah, as you can see, the bishop on b3 controls pretty well the knight. You see how it's like some sort of fan, you know? How do you call these things? Like the you know?
Those Chinese fans?
Exactly, those ones, yeah. Some in that way. And basically, yeah, it's pretty hard for black to create any sort of counterplay here. He just needs to wait until white takes the pawns, basically. So yeah, let's take a look at Andre's game. We were saying that most likely win a draw, although after b3 some developments have happened. Interesting.
He doesn't take?
He didn't take the pawn. Interesting. So here, normally, I thought the move was to retreat with the queen, but then once again, this will make white very passive after something like queen d5. You can tell how from having the pieces like this, queen on e4, knight on c4, then suddenly your queen needs to relegate to c2, and now the black queen becomes active. That's why he went for queen e5, sort of not losing the initiative, but I was curious what happens if pawn takes, knight takes. Is there any real compensation for the pawn? I mean, of course, like, it shouldn't be losing right away, but I don't see why wouldn't he take the pawn.
Yeah, I'm surprised Andre would actually just leave it hanging.
No, I mean, he did it because of practical reasons, I think. Like, if he were to defend it,
the queen to check.
yeah,
Okay.
then he would just lose momentum. And it's pretty clear that black is playing riskless, you know. While here, from a practical point of view, I think he was trying to pose problems to Damasurin, because let's say something like b6 runs into something like knight f5, right? And suddenly we're talking now.
Checkmate.
Now we have some ideas. Knight e7, knight takes e6, right? If, let's say something like queen f8. I can take the pawn and
check, and you get the material back.
Oh yeah, I get the material back, and white's completely fine. So apparently the only move to keep the advantage was queen d7, you know, with the idea of, I guess, if knight f5, f6 probably, yeah, f6, and then the queen defense. Of course, this is not that simple to see. I mean, I would think maybe he considered it, but he didn't like this certain position. So he's like, you know, honestly, I see my board 1 is most likely gonna win, board 2 is most likely gonna win. So he's like, okay, I would just play solid, you know, and that's why he goes to knight d7, which can backfire, honestly, you know, to not take the chances sometimes. You know?
Yeah, and you're talking about Batsurin's thought process with the black pieces here. He's from St. Louis University, Makove from Dallas. And then there's one other game from this match that we haven't tuned into recently. I think Tianqi Wang's game.
Yeah, let's take a look at that one, actually. Did he continue here? Yeah, he played queen d4, queen e7. Yeah, most likely this should be a draw. I would think maybe Andre will try to push, considering the situation on board 1 and 3. But most likely, I think it should be a draw, unless there's some kind of mess in time scramble. But we will see, I guess. Oh wait, we have more developments here. What is this? So after queen d4, queen e7, he played b4, c5. Yeah, I think Damasurin just wants to simplify as much as possible, and that's the idea of c5. And now, yeah, probably another pawn will be traded. Maybe also the b and c pawn will be traded, and this game will most likely end in a draw, I would think, you know?
So, how's Tianqi doing? Who's Tianqi playing against?
Aditya Samant from UTD. Let's take a look at that one.
And this is the board 4?
Correct. This is board 4. We were saying that here white has a comfortable position with the white pieces, once again because of this beautiful knight on f5 and the pawns being on g7 and h6. If one of them moves, then the other one weakens. So h4 with the idea of h5. Tianqi probably already felt pressure, that's why he went for bishop c8. And Aditya just ignores it, right? h5. Because taking on f5, even though, yeah, he gets rid of the knight, now it creates this problem of having these two pawns controlling a lot of space on the king side, right? The d6 square is blocked. Then probably white will continue with bishop f4. And funny enough, even though he got rid of the knight, the issue of the g7 pawn still remains, you know, because these two pawns, f5 and h5, make impossible for black to play g6 in good conditions, and eventually white can try to regroup in this way, play the rook on g1, the other one on d1, keep a constant pressure on g7, and black will struggle to develop his remaining pieces. So things are looking good for white here. So black took on e6, sorry, black played bishop e6, knight e3, with the idea of pushing f4 and f5, bishop e7 and f4, right?
So this is the hope for Dallas's team, right? Is
Yes.
to get a win on this board.
Correct. To get a win on this board, and then
Try to draw.
and then Balaji hopefully making a draw, and then the match will most likely end up in 2-2. You know, a draw basically.
So that might be asking for a bit much.
Yeah. I mean, it's what we should hope for. But let's see: f4, rook d8, rook takes, bishop takes, bishop d2. Just bring the pieces. Once again, this is the main issue of black. If these rooks were not to exist, the rook on a1 and rook on g8 were off the board, then probably black will be close to being fine. Maybe a little bit, what's the word? Lacking of space because of this f4 and f5 coming. But without the rook on g8 getting into the game, black is just much better here. So bishop c8, bishop c3. You can see how Aditya doesn't rush. You know, he takes his time, improves here his pieces, brings the rook to d1, and then he decides when to play f5 or not. Bishop b7, king g3.
So I can't help but think with the computer saying it's a miss.
Yeah, it's a
when
miss.
the bishop fianchettos, does that maybe alleviate the knight to hop in?
That's a good question. Why is king g3 a mistake, quote unquote, right? Why king g3 is a bad move? Maybe knight f5 was a critical move, although bishop e4 could have been a response there, right? I don't know. Maybe just a fork. Where's the fork? You mean the c2?
Yeah.
Maybe just rook c1 followed by king e3. But yeah, I don't really see what's wrong with king g3, honestly. I mean, king g3, bishop e4.
Another
What
miss.
what did he miss? Let's
Yeah,
check
game,
actually.
you got a game, yeah.
G6 apparently. So apparently king g3 allow black to
this is
finally play
Yeah,
g6.
this is the breakout that you mentioned. If white had gotten also a pawn on f5, that wouldn't have been as favorable.
Correct. And I guess the main difference, let's say he will have played g6 here right away, right? Oh, I have rook h1, something I didn't have with the bishop b7. Okay, I